This is a compilation of over 2 hours of Fallout's Wasteland horrors explained. So sit back, relax, and grab your popcorn. Let's kick things off with the most cryptid creatures that awaits in the Wasteland. From a husband who drank his wife's blood to a genius maniac that slaved people with explosives, today I'm going to explain what happened to every single serial killer from Fallout. 1. Cannibalistic transformation. This first serial killer is Morris Stevens, a man whose sickness of the mind would turn him into a monster and strip away his body until it reflected the darkness hidden beneath. Exploring the forest region in Fallout 76's West Virginia Wasteland, you'll come across a pre-war private school for the ultra-wealthy known as Bolton Greens. Post-war, it appears to have been fortified from the outside, with cages that can be found all around the makeshift campsites that dot the golf course of the school. Nearby, you'll find a larger cage containing several skeletons, with a sign by the gate that reads, "No snacking." If you continue to the left, you'll come across a makeshift cooking station made of a burned-out vehicle. On its table, you'll find a skull next to a pot and several pieces of cookware. Continuing to the school's lobby, you'll find piles of visceral remains and gore bags everywhere. What happened here? What sadistic masterminds could have left this scale of horror behind, and why did they do it? After the bombs dropped, raiders ravaged the wasteland and took what they needed, often leaving a trail of bodies behind. One such raider gang, the Gormans, would rise and commit atrocities, crossing a line that most others wouldn't dare. They were cannibals, the worst of the worst, capturing their victims and raising them like livestock until they prepared them for slaughter. Morris Stevens was their leader, alongside his wife Edie, and they developed one simple code that was aimed at preventing this gang of cannibals from fighting amongst themselves. Never eat your own. The Gormans had found the ruins of the private school mostly intact, and used it as their stronghold, as it was already fortified and could be held easily. They modified a room to act as their meat locker and quickly went to work, capturing wastelanders and harvesting their flesh. So sadistic were these raiders that they would get into arguments over which gender tasted the best, resulting in brutal brawls amongst their number. They were opportunists, and used the former robotic waiting staff in the cafeteria of the school to do the dirty job of turning their victims into elegant dishes fit for the most elite. When it comes to serial killers working alongside one another, they can never truly trust each other. If the opportunity arises and they had the urge, they will slaughter their own. When one of the Gormans, Bob, noticed Morris Stevens had begun to act weirder than normal, he would question why. A Gormand by the name of Gregory went missing, and the raiders spent a whole day searching for him, with many thinking that he ran off and didn't want to be bothered, until Bob convinced the gang to mutiny against Morris and Edie. They would find what was left of Gregory in Morris's room. Morris and his wife Edie had broken the gang's one code: never eat your own. Morris's bloodlust had not been satiated by the slaughtering of the innocent. His cravings for human flesh would lead to him desiring none other than to consume everyone around him, stopping only at his wife. Despite being their leaders, the gang expelled Morris and Edie Stevens. The pair would take shelter within the Wendigo cave, where his cravings would continue to grow and take over any sanity that Morris had left in him. Serial killers who have become too far gone will often hurt those close to them, even their families. Inside Wendigo Cave, he would cross that final line. Exploring Wendigo Cave, you will come across the skeleton remains of Edie. While intact, a holotape listed as Morris's End can be found nearby. The holotape explains how delicious was the blood of her darling Edie, but at the end recovers a bit of his own mind and understands that he killed her. Still, at the end loses the rest of his humanity as he is starving and needs more and more blood. After this act of matricide, Morris would mutate into a creature that would become known to the Wasteland as the progenitor Wendigo. Nobody knows exactly how a Wendigo is created, though it is speculated that the act of cannibalism combined with heavy radiation and low levels of FEV triggers a cellular response that mutates individuals into these monsters. His body would grow gaunt and thin, with dark charred skin that glowed with radiation. His arms would grow long and bony, and his stomach would bloat with mass. His physical abilities would grow far beyond human abilities and made him much faster, with his teeth becoming larger and sharper. With the body to hunt and devour anyone unfortunate enough to cross his path, he would hunt down the Gormans, feasting upon those who cast him into exile. Morris Stevens would ultimately meet his end at the hands of the Vault 76 dwellers, after having taken his revenge upon the Gormans near the skeleton of his wife. 2. Commercialized murder. In the Wasteland, you can find all sorts of characters. Many are trying to make an honest living working in a profession. They've tinkered countless hours to ensure that they are skilled in their trade, as reliability is what keeps you alive in the post-apocalyptic world of Fallout. But what about those that decide to take a more direct approach approach to making ends meet, those that try to force their trade on others and will not take no for an answer. Here we have Doc Morbid, a serial killer so evil that the echoes of his doings are felt throughout the series to this very day. While exploring the hub in the first Fallout game, following the main street south to the market, you will find a merchant named Iguana Bob selling fresh iguana meat from his stand. Talking to Iguana Bob, he will tell you about his wares. He offers whole iguanas on a stick for $20 and prime select pieces for $8. At first glance, Bob seems to just be operating a successful iguana meat stand, with the whole iguanas on a stick clearly being the real deal, and prime select being kebabs with meat and veggies. It's not until you arrive at Junktown when you discover the sadistic truth behind the meat sold by Iguana Bob. Exploring the town, you will come across Junktown's only doctor, a man by the name of Morbid. His practice is surprisingly well outfitted, despite being located in an old garage. He is skilled at his trade and shares all his experience with the other doctors in the Wasteland, making sure that everyone can provide quality health care to those who can pay. Though this is all to hide a dark secret, because if the Vault Dweller approaches Doc Morbid and receives a checkup but cannot pay, Doc Morbid's personality will twist into a self-serving maniac that is willing to break his Hippocratic oath to earn an extra buck. He will threaten the player with violence if they cannot pay, and if the courier continues to insist that they will not pay, he will then say, "Have it your way. Cougar Flash, show our patient to the lab," calling on his goons to attack the Vault Dweller and deliver him to Doc Morbid's underground lab, where the Doc then heads to. When the Vault Dweller kills both Cougar and Flash, Morbid will return to the surface and ask the Vault Dweller to just go away. If the Vault Dweller then goes to the Doc's lab underground, he will find out how the sadistic doctor intended to receive his compensation. The underground has multiple bloody tables, where human carcasses seem to have been stripped of their flesh, leaving the perfectly bare skeletons left behind by Doc Morbidin as the serial killer harvested his victim's meat. You will also find Gretch, Doc Morbid's dwarf assistant, who will reveal to the Vault Dweller the whole operation if the Vault Dweller convinces him that he was sent there by Doc Morbid himself. He tells the Vault Dweller that he and Doc Morbid prepare the victims and send them to Iguana Bob to sell as his prime choice select. The Vault Dweller can kill both Gretch and Doc Morbid after this, but the canon seems to suggest that he survives. And by 2280, his business practice is shared throughout the Wasteland in the Tales of a Junktown Jerky Vendor magazine. There is no way to report Iguana Bob, and attacking him will just cause the police force of the hub to become hostile towards the Vault Dweller. It seems that Doc Morbid's operation continues even after his death, as Iguana Bob's son, Mikey Frazier, continues to operate the family business all the way into 2161 during the events of Fallout 2. Doc Morbid's victims never received the justice they deserved, and he continued to butcher those who could not pay, becoming one of the most prolific serial killers in the Wasteland. 3. Technological tyranny. What happens when a maniacal genius desires to learn the secrets of the old world and achieve supremacy over others without care for the outcome? Serial killers such as these will take out all that stand in their way, willing to sacrifice their followers and experiment on those they deem their lessers. Many of them will not understand their wrongdoings as they see it as their right to do as they must, so long as it serves their desires. Father Elijah was once the esteemed elder of the Mojave Brotherhood of Steel, until they engaged in a brutal and bloody conflict with the NCR. Despite the irregularity of a scribe reaching the rank of elder, which is traditionally attained only by paladins, his genius led him to be admired by his peers, as he was able to understand pre-war technology without the need for a thorough inspection. As elder, he used his position to command the Brotherhood to scavenge the Wasteland for technologies that could be recovered. He would improve upon the designs of recovered technology, even creating weapons that drew the ire of the more conservative members of the Brotherhood. The other elders would come to fear his ambitions, sending him into the Mojave to form a new chapter, rather than deal with the threat he posed to their status quo. In the Mojave, his unchecked authority would lead to his chapter viewing him as an unpleasant leader, seeing his underlings as but tools that he could use to acquire more technology that he could experiment on. He disdained human interaction, preferring to keep any contact with his underlings strictly to terminal messages. He showed affection to but one of his underlings, scribe Veronica Santangelo, the sole individual that he sought to share his knowledge with. Such was his affection for her, that he used his status as elder to end her relationship with Knight Christine Royce, so that Veronica would follow him into the Mojave. She would never know the truth of why her relationship would come to an end, as Elijah's narcissism would never allow him to feel sympathy enough to tell her the truth. In the Mojave, his mission was to take control of the Hoover Dam and study its technology so that the Brotherhood might build similar structures. However, he was too late. By the time his newly found chapter would arrive at the dam, the NCR had already established control. This infuriated Elijah, leading his narcissism to the conclusion that he would need to take the Helios 1 solar power facility to fortify it and prepare to drive the NCR away from what he viewed viewed as rightfully his in the Mojave. In his eyes, the NCR was but children playing with a bomb, unfit to control the dam and nor Helios 1. The NCR and the Brotherhood would go to war, leading to massive losses on the NCR side. Already lives would begin to be lost under the command of Elder Elijah, who did not care for the death toll as long as it served his desires. To compensate against the overwhelming fire superiority of the Brotherhood, the NCR would rely on quick guerrilla skirmishes that pushed the Brotherhood back to their stronghold. His subordinates would become the first lives lost to his ambitions. As his forces dwindled, Elijah would grow increasingly obsessed with understanding the secrets of Helios 1 and its Archimedes 2, an energy-based artillery satellite built by Poseidon Energy and based there. Believing it to be the key to victory, Elijah would send many of his remaining knights and paladins to their death to slow the NCR advance. He desired time and refused his subordinates' pleas to abandon the facility and retreat into Brotherhood control territory. As his underlings began to increasingly question his orders, he would disappear from Helios 1, telling no one of his departure, not even his pupil, Veronica. Many, such as Paladin Ramos, would view trying to defend Helios as a blunder of the worst kind. His abandonment of his chapter would lead his former subordinates to flee to the Hidden Valley Bunker, and the Council of Elders would issue an order to the Circle of Steel, an organization within the Brotherhood dedicated to dealing with internal affairs and desertions, to assassinate Elijah and finally put an end to his obsessive ambitions. Amongst the assassination squad was none other than Knight Christine Royce, who would end up assigned to the Circle of Steel after he used his connections to split her and Veronica. Elijah's ambitions would lead him to the ruins of the Big MT, where he would study its vast reserves of pre-war technology. The Think Tank, a group of pre-war scientists whose brains were preserved in machines, noticed him as he conducted his research, and they sought to contain him. Captured, he would escape faster than the Think Tank could react. Shortly after this escape, he would meet a courier by the name of Ulysses, who before disembarking shared with Elijah the legend of the Sierra Madre. Ever the obsessive narcissistic psychopath, Elijah would become obsessed with the Sierra Madre and the secrets it could hold that may allow him to take his vengeance upon the NCR, but he knew he could not do this alone. Elijah began to experiment upon the survivors of the Little Yangtze, a pre-war concentration camp that housed both captured Chinese citizens as well as Chinese-born Americans. His experiments would lead him to strap survivors with explosive collars and force them to seek out a radio frequency from the Sierra Madre until he was finally able to locate it and establish a connection. He did not care for the lives of those to whom he used as a tool, taking their lives as he saw fit and leaving a bloody path in his wake. This trail would be noticed, with the Circle of Steel losing all but one of their numbers to the very same obstacles that Elijah had overcome. Knight Christine Royce caught him in her scope, just as the think tank had finally tracked him down with an army of robots. He saw that it was time to make his escape from the Little Yangtze concentration camp, as he had located the mythical casino and perfected his explosive collars. Feeling no remorse, he detonated the remaining survivors of Little Yangtze and made his escape in the wake of the destruction. In the wake of his escape, Christine Royce would become the subject of relentless medical experimentation conducted by the think tank. Elijah found himself stuck within the confines at the Big MT until finding the Signal Hills transmitter and using it to hack into the think tank and cause their mechanical bodies all kinds of trouble that could still be found affecting them during the events of the Big MT DLC for Fallout New Vegas. Finally, using the train system of the Big MT to make his final escape, he made his way back to the Mojave. With the Mojave chapter of the Brotherhood of Steel in hiding, he would take an abandoned bunker known as Bunker 13 to become his base of operations. He would travel to the Sierra Madre often, as he sought to discover its secrets and use them to slaughter the NCR. As he made round trips from the Sierra Madre and back to his bunker, he performed analyses of the mysterious red cloud that made up the Sierra Madre's environment. He would later comment that the cloud is what blankets the sky here. You may smell it in the air, copper and sulfur, burns the lungs and seeps into the skin. The cloud was toxic, able to burn through most forms of protection. The only people that were seemingly able to endure it for long were the deranged survivors of the Sierra Madre's former staff, who were trapped within experimental dark light hazmat suits sold to them by the think tank. Once ready to depart to the Sierra Madre for the final time, the last bit of humanity within him felt compelled to leave a final message for Veronica in the event he did not return. It can be found within the now abandoned Brotherhood bunker in the form of a terminal entry that the player can download to their Pip-Boy. It cannot be read, showing only, "This holomessage is locked." A label on the front reads, "For Veronica." A strange sensor mounted on the back seems to be tied to a locking mechanism. The player can choose to deliver the message to Veronica, but we are never revealed as to what it entailed. At the Sierra Madre, Elijah would discover so much more than he had hoped. The cloud had preserved the casino as if it had been constructed yesterday. None of the decay that the rest of of the world had experienced after the bombs dropped could be found there. The cloud's deadly nature had also kept out any would-be treasure hunters, though it did have an automated security system that used hard-light holograms that Elijah had seen the likes of at Big MT. He discovered that the vending machines there could synthesize anything that he would need, including food and water. There, he formed a plan to use the cloud to recreate the Mojave in his image. This plan was to force the Mojave Wasteland to bow before him by using the holograms to force a collar onto everyone, though there was no way he could make it through the defenses of the Sierra Madre alone. He would lure whoever he could into his clutches, where he would strap exploding collars to their necks and create a signal chain that would cause the collars to explode should anyone disobey him. He would capture many unsuspecting victims, sending several teams into the Sierra Madre, all failing before they could reach its control room. Eventually, he would find a loyal follower in the form of a nightkin named Dog, who would obey his commands without the need for a collar. He would eventually make it into the casino, right near where he wanted to be, but found himself trapped and unable to escape. He accepted that he would die there. Little did he know, Dog had continued to lead countless individuals to their deaths in the Sierra Madre. Eventually, Dog would ambush Courier 6 while he was exploring the abandoned Brotherhood bunker. Courier 6's Pip-Boy had made contact with Elijah Communications and led Elijah to gain a new sense of hope for his plans to finally come to fruition. He used the Courier's Pip-Boy to coordinate Dog, who had trapped 2 other individuals to fulfill his master's wishes. The Circle of Steel Knight Christine Royce, who had finally escaped from the terrors of the Big MT, and Dean Domino, a ghoulified singer who had survived in the Sierra Madre for 200 years. Following his command, he ordered them to trigger the event that would open the doors to the resort, which allowed Elijah and the Courier to meet up at the Sierra Madre vault. Now face to face, the Courier was free to end Elijah's quest for vengeance once and for all. Rather, he trapped Elijah forever in a prison of his own design, or killed him so that he could pose no more of a threat to the Mojave. The result was the same. The survivors of Elijah's scheme made it out with a portion of a gold reserve left sealed away in the Sierra Madre vault, each finally being freed from this nightmare once and for all. With Elijah being no more, they would part ways. Dog would lose himself, forming a new personality that could finally find some peace. Dean Domino would set his sights for New Vegas, where he could perform on stage once more. Christine Royce, her mission complete, stayed at the Sierra Madre to safeguard its technology from ever reaching the hands of cruel individuals such as Elijah. Ambition can often bring out the worst in us, with individuals such as Elijah being enthralled to his own narcissism that he would become a serial killer that showed only cold logic as he used his victims as tools. His death would leave one message, that the promise to change your fortunes begin again. Finding it isn't the hard part, it's letting go. 4. Scientific fanaticism. Many serial killers believe their actions as simply a means to an end, burying their guilt with claims of noble intentions. Anyone who dares to risk their goals must be dealt with. As they believe themselves justified, they will stop at nothing to achieve their goals, and those goals will often be misguided. This was the case of a serial killer whose hopes led only to despair. This is the story of Edgar Blackburn. Blackburn's misguided intentions could have destroyed post-war Appalachia, a risk he was willing to take, thinking his experiment had finally succeeded and he could cure all disease. Edgar Blackburn wanted to make the world a better place by using science to increase the livelihoods of all those around him, leading him to study many different fields of science. He used his scientific knowledge to score a job at Westtech, working on the Panimmunity virion. The Panimmunity virion was a mutagen that was designed to rapidly mutate edible plants and vegetation to achieve plants that could adapt to different environments and yield greater harvests. Blackburn hoped to solve the hunger crisis that had taken hold of pre-war America, leading to riots like the one in October 2077 that took place in Roxbury, Boston, and reached a climax when a window had been broken at the Roxbury Food Bank, which led to crowds raiding the food bank. The hunger crisis was so severe that there were armed soldiers stationed at the food bank. They would respond to the crowd rushing in by firing at the crowd, which led to 4 people dead and 8 others injured. Blackburn's dream of solving starvation once and for all failed when the Panimmunity virion began to be tested on small creatures, such as flatworms and smaller mammals. Westtech's scientists would discover that the Panimmunity virion increased the muscle mass of the initial test subjects, with its military wing seeing it as a way to create super soldiers to sell to the US government. It would go on to be renamed the Forced Evolutionary Virus, also known as FEV, with human testing beginning soon after. If you read the loading screens playing Fallout 76, you will eventually come across one that says the first super mutants in Appalachia were created right before the Great War when Westtech poisoned the drinking water of Huntersville WV with the FEV virus in a sinister secret experiment gone horribly wrong. Blackburn was disgusted by this, considering it a great tragedy that should have never happened. He blamed himself himself for his work on the FEV, though he never gave up the idea that it could be used for the good of the common man. When the bombs dropped, he would survive both the immediate aftermath and the outbreak of the Scorch virus, fleeing the state and only returning when the former inhabitants of Vault 76 were able to cure the virus. During his time traveling the Wasteland, he would see what life was like for humanity and the folk remedies and makeshift medicines that were used in place of what had been. He resolved to perfect the FEV and use it to make humanity immune to anything that post-war America could throw at it. He concluded that for the betterment of humanity, he would have to commit acts of unspeakable evil. He would gather some of his former West Tech colleagues and begin experimenting to perfect FEV, but he would find himself lacking in terms of supplies. He would hire the ruthless Hellcat mercenaries to capture human test subjects, managing his headquarters in none other than the ruins of Vault 96, which was designed for scientists to conduct experiments on plant life. But its harsh quotas led to the scientists revolting and damaging much of the vault. He would record many terminal entries that to justify the horrific experiments he conducted on innocent wastelanders, with his very first entry being, "What I am about to do will almost assuredly make me a villain in the eyes of many. My work is distasteful and must be conducted in secret. Here, for whatever person may one day hear this, I say, for the record, that what I will do, I do out of love. An unselfish love that knows no rest. Not for a person. No cliched deceased spouse or lost child motivates me. Humanity is my love, though none would accuse me of excess sentiment. Many serial killers will seek to justify their actions, to hide themselves from the shame of guilt. When the Brotherhood of Steel returned and set up their base of operations at Fort Atlas, Blackburn made contact in order to request aid in the acquisition of rare materials, having heard of their impressive reserves of pre-war technology. Upon meeting the Brotherhood, he deduced that they did not have anything to offer that he had not already had himself and left. After taking notice of the emergence of large groups of super mutants, the leader of the Appalachian Brotherhood, Paladin Rahmani, would begin to investigate their source and assault locations with a heavy super mutant presence. Eventually, the Brotherhood would discover the disappearances of Wastelanders amongst the Blue Ridge caravan convoys, which led to Rahmani and the Vault Dweller discovering that it was none other than Blackburn that was responsible for the super mutants. With Brotherhood scribe Odessa Valdez tracking Blackburn down at Vault 96, they took him back to Fort Atlas for questioning. He didn't resist their integrations and openly revealed to them that he is not working alone, even acknowledging the moral failings of his experiments, believing it to simply be a means to an end. Paladin Romani and her second-in-command, Knight Shin, would follow Blackwell back to the rest of his team at the West Tech facility. When reunited with his team, he revealed that he had already completed his final experiment and had set the facility to release his FEV through the air and groundwater on an automatic timer, with him being the only one with the code to deactivate it. He gave the Brotherhood an ultimatum: release him or unleash FEV upon Aplacha. They had no choice but to release him to return to his team and shut off the timer. When told that he had gone too far, he would respond, "Too far? Does that term even apply when the goal is the permanent protection of humanity from the horrors of the Wasteland? I told you my work focused on the health of Appalachia's people. You must see that my research was towards that aim." After being released, he revealed that after all the sacrifices made to complete his experiment, it's perfected and cannot fail. He exposed himself to what he claimed to be his perfected strain of FEV in hopes that he could prove to everyone that what he did needed to be done, saying, "In time, you will realize the gift I have given you." Soon after exposure, he would mutate into a super mutant behemoth that would rival the likes of Fallout 4's Swan. After the Brotherhood fought a brutal battle against Blackburn, his colleagues would deactivate the timer and submit to the Brotherhood to face their punishment. In the end, it was up to the Vault 76 survivors to decide if they were to be executed or employed by the Brotherhood as doctors, and sworn to no longer experiment with FEV. Dr. Edgar Blackburn was haunted by what his work had done to the pre-war town of Huntsville, WV, and sought to use their sacrifice to mean something that could better the world, but in his own arrogance and drive, he killed further innocents and only achieve in unleashing mutated horrors upon the wasteland that may never be eliminated completely. He is a serial killer whose actions have led to the continued death of innocents long after his spree was put to an end. Every serial killer will someday meet their end. This has been what happened to every serial killer in Fallout. Vault 8. This was one of Vault Tech's rare control vaults with minimal interference, designed to open after 10 years and repopulate Nevada using a Garden of Eden creation kit. The experiment was to see if a vault could actually function as advertised, rather than as a twisted psychological torture chamber. Vault 8's residents successfully founded Vault City, a technologically advanced settlement that became one of the most prosperous communities in the post-war world. However, success came with its own problems, Vault City developed serious class issues, with pure-strain vault dwellers considering themselves superior to Wasteland outsiders. The vault shows that even when vault tech experiments work as intended, human nature finds ways to create new problems. Vault 8 proves that successful vault experiments can still produce societies with serious superiority complexes. If you thought class warfare was disturbing, the next vault turned democracy into a death sentence. Vault 11. This vault features one of the most psychologically twisted experiments in the entire series. Residents had to annually vote to sacrifice one dweller to the vault's computer, or everyone would supposedly be killed. The experiment was designed to test morality and social pressure, creating a society built on murder and betrayal. Elections became campaigns of character assassination as people tried to nominate their enemies for death. The vault descended into paranoia, violence, and political manipulation until only 5 residents remained. The ultimate irony? The computer's final message revealed that refusing to sacrifice anyone would have let them all go free. Vault 11 represents Vault Tech's cruelest lesson about the corruption of democratic institutions under extreme pressure. Vault 11 shows that the most horrific societies are the ones where murder becomes a civic duty. But the next vault's experiment was literally built into its fundamental design. Vault 12. This vault's door was purposely left unsealed to expose residents to massive amounts of radiation, turning them into ghouls as part of a long-term study on radiation's effects. The experiment created Necropolis, a city populated by both intelligent ghouls and feral ones driven mad by radiation exposure. Vault 12 in Fallout 1 became foundational to ghoul lore in the series, showing how Vault Tech was willing to condemn entire populations to horrific mutation just to gather scientific data. The Vault represents one of the more straightforward experiments. No psychological manipulation needed when you can just leave the door open and watch people slowly transform into living corpses. Vault 12 proves that sometimes the simplest experiments are the most cruel. If you thought radiation exposure was bad, the next vault was designed to never let anyone leave. Vault 13. The home vault of Fallout's original protagonist was designed to stay closed for 200 years, serving as a future genetic reserve for the Enclave's post-war plans. The experiment tested long-term isolation and genetic preservation, but the water chip failure, after just 80 years, forced the Vault Dweller into the Wasteland. Vault 13 showcases the Enclave's long-term planning and complete indifference toward their human test subjects. They were willing to keep people trapped underground for 2 centuries just to maintain a pure human gene. The Vault's failure ironically launched the entire Fallout series, proving that even the most carefully planned experiments can be undone by simple mechanical failure. Vault 13 shows that the Enclave's idea of genetic preservation was basically a 200-year prison sentence, but the next vault decided to pack as much conflict as possible into one space. Vault 15. This vault was populated with residents chosen for extreme ideological diversity and designed to stay closed for 50 years. The experiment tested how different belief systems would interact under pressure, and the results were exactly as violent as you'd expect. 4 major factions eventually splintered off from the vault, including the founders of both the Khans Raider tribe and the New California Republic. Vault 15 demonstrates Vault Tech's understanding that ideological differences become exponentially more dangerous in confined spaces. The Vault essentially became a pressure cooker for political extremism, proving that diversity without common ground leads to inevitable conflict. Vault 15 proves that putting people with opposite worldviews in a confined space creates future warlords and politicians. If you thought ideological conflict was destructive, the next vault's fate remains largely mysterious. Vault 17. Details about this vault's experiment are mostly unknown, but all residents were reportedly abducted by super mutants from the Master's army in Fallout 1. The vault is connected to Lily Bowen's tragic backstory in New Vegas. She was transformed from a grandmother into a Nightkin super mutant. Vault 17 represents one of the series' unsolved mysteries. We know something terrible happened, but the specific experiment remains hidden. The vault shows how some of Vault Tech's experiments were interrupted by external forces, though the residents probably didn't consider super mutant abduction an improvement over whatever psychological torture was planned. Vault 17 shows that sometimes being kidnapped by super mutants is preferable to completing a Vault Tech experiment. But the next vault decided to turn architecture into psychological warfare. Vault 19. This vault was divided into red and blue sectors to foster paranoia and rivalry between different groups of residents. The experiment tested how artificial divisions and color-coded tribalism would affect a closed society, and the results were predictably violent. The vault eventually collapsed from internal conflict as residents fought over imaginary differences created by nothing more than room assignments. Vault 19 in New Vegas demonstrates how easily people can be manipulated into hating each other over completely arbitrary distinctions. The experiment shows that humans will find ways to create conflict even when they have no real reasons to fight. Vault 19 proves that people will literally kill each other over the color of their living quarters. If you thought color-based warfare was absurd, the next vault turned every decision into a game of chance. Vault 21. This vault required all disputes to be resolved through gambling and games of chance rather than violence or democratic processes. The experiment tested whether a society based entirely on luck could function, and it actually worked surprisingly well until Robert House won the entire vault in a card game. The vault was eventually converted into a casino hotel in New Vegas, making it one of the few vault experiments that continued operating in its original form. Vault 21 represents Vault-Tech's exploration of alternative governance systems, showing that sometimes random chance produces better results than human judgment. Vault 21 shows that a society based on pure luck somehow works better than most political systems. But the next vault decided to experiment with agriculture in the most dangerous way possible. Vault 22. This vault was dedicated to cultivating aggressive, genetically enhanced crops designed to resist harsh post-apocalyptic conditions. The agricultural experiment went horribly wrong when the enhanced plants unleashed a devastating spore infection that killed or transformed the entire vault population. Vault 22 in New Vegas is now overrun by deadly plant creatures and filled with toxic spores that turn people into plant-human hybrids. The vault represents Vault-Tech's willingness to weaponize nature itself, showing how attempts to improve food production can create biological nightmares instead. Vault 22 proves that playing God with agriculture creates killer plants that make regular radiation seem friendly. If you thought murderous plants were bad, the next vault decided to test human limits through simple overcrowding. Vault 27. This vault was crammed with 0 people instead of its intended capacity of 0, creating an overcrowding experiment that tested resource scarcity and social pressure. The results were exactly what you'd expect. Resource shortages led to rioting, social collapse, and death as residents fought over food, water, and living space. Vault 27 demonstrates that sometimes the most effective experiments are the simplest ones. You don't need elaborate psychological manipulation when you can just pack too many people into a small space and watch them tear each other apart. The vault shows how quickly civilization breaks down when basic needs aren't met. But the next vault decided to remove adults from the equation entirely. Vault 29. This vault only allowed children under 15 to enter, with all adults barred from residence. The children were raised by an AI called Mother Eve in an experiment studying youth development without adult guidance. Vault 29 represents one of Vault-Tech's most ethically questionable experiments, essentially orphaning hundreds of children to see how they develop in isolation. The experiment tested whether artificial intelligence could successfully replace human parenting and social structures. The Vault's ultimate fate remains uncertain. It demonstrates how Vault-Tech was willing to sacrifice entire generations of children for scientific data. If you thought AI parenting was disturbing, the next vault decided to arm everyone and see what happened. Vault 34. This vault's armory was deliberately overstocked with weapons and ammunition, but featured a faulty door that could easily open, allowing residents to leave whenever they wanted. The experiment tested the effects of excessive militarization on a supposedly sealed society. Internal conflict eventually broke out as heavily armed factions fought for control, and radiation leaks from the damaged reactor killed or mutated most of the population. Vault 34 demonstrates how access to unlimited firepower combined with cabin fever creates the perfect recipe for civil war. But the next vault took deprivation to its most basic level. Vault 36. This vault provided only thin, watery gruel as food for all residents, creating a chronic hunger experiment that tested malnutrition's effects on society. The residents faced constant hunger, malnutrition, and the psychological stress of never having a satisfying meal. Vault 36 represents Vault-Tech's exploration of basic human needs. What happens when you meet the absolute minimum calorie requirements but provide no food satisfaction or variety? The experiment tested whether a society could function when its members were technically alive but constantly miserable from hunger. The vault shows how quickly social bonds break down when everyone is always thinking about their next meal. If you thought bad food was depressing, the next vault literally kept everyone in the dark. Vault 42. This vault permitted no light bulbs greater than 40 watts, forcing residents to live in constant dimness. The experiment tested the long-term effects of extreme low-light conditions and sensory restriction on human psychology. Residents suffered from chronic frustration, depression, and negative psychological impacts from never experiencing proper lighting. Vault 42 demonstrates how something as simple as inadequate lighting can become psychological torture when extended indefinitely. The vault shows that Vault-Tec understood how environmental factors could be weaponized against human well-being without any obvious mechanical devices or chemicals. But the next vault decided to add a wild card to the social experiment. Vault 43. This vault was populated with 20 men, 10 women, and 1 panther, creating what's considered a deliberately absurd scenario to test how residents would cope with a wild predator in their midst. The experiment's outcome is unclear, but it represents Vault-Tec's willingness to introduce completely unpredictable variables into their social studies. Vault 43 shows how the company wasn't above adding literal wild animals to their human experiments, possibly just to see if desperate people could find ways to coexist with apex predators. The vault demonstrates that some experiments were designed more for shock value than scientific merit. Vault 43 proves that Vault-Tec thought adding a panther to any social situation would make it more interesting. If you thought wild animals were chaotic, the next vault let artificial intelligence play deadly games with human leadership. Vault 51. This vault replaced traditional human oversight with a Zax-class AI that manipulated residents into constant competitions to determine leadership fitness. The AI created cycles of conflict by continually changing the Prospeld AI rules and encouraging deadly competition among residents. Vault 51's experiment formed the basis for Fallout 76's nuclear winter scenario, where the AI's manipulation created an endless battle royale among the survivors. But the next vault decided to test human patience through perpetual mechanical failure. Vault 53. This vault had all its equipment intentionally designed to fail at regular intervals, forcing residents into endless cycles of repair and maintenance. The experiment tested human responses to chronic frustration and technical incompetence, creating a society where nothing ever worked properly for long. The vault shows that sometimes the most effective way to break people's spirits is to make their basic tools unreliable. If you thought broken equipment was frustrating, the next vault removed entertainment entirely. Vault 55. This vault entered without any entertainment tapes or media, forcing residents to provide their own recreation in a complete intellectual deprivation experiment. The vault tested how people would cope with absolute boredom and whether they could create their own cultural activities without external input. Residents were forced to develop their own games, stories, and social activities while dealing with the psychological strain of monotony. Vault 55 represents Vault-Tec's understanding that entertainment isn't just luxury, it's essential for mental health. The experiment shows how quickly people deteriorate when they have nothing to distract them from their circumstances. But the next vault decided that bad entertainment was worse than no entertainment. Vault 56. This vault contained only entertainment tapes of a single terrible comedian, forcing residents to endure the same awful comedy routines repeatedly. The experiment tested whether bad cultural input was worse than no input at all, subjecting people to comedy so unfunny it became torture. Vault 56 represents the logical extension of Vault 55's experiment, proving that humans need quality entertainment, not just noise to fill the silence. If you thought bad entertainment was cruel, the next vault created extreme gender imbalances. Vault 68. This vault was populated with 999 men and just 1 woman, creating a severe gender imbalance that resulted in social, psychological, and genetic crises. The experiment tested how society would manage under enforced demographic extremes, essentially creating a pressure cooker of sexual frustration and competition. The single woman faced impossible social pressure, while the men competed desperately for her attention. Vault 68 proves that extreme gender imbalances create societies built on desperation and conflict, and its counterpart vault flipped the script entirely. Vault 69. This vault featured 999 women and 1 man, testing the reverse scenario of Vault 68's gender imbalance experiment. While the exact outcomes aren't fully documented, the premise created similar social pressures and genetic bottlenecks from the opposite direction. The lone man faced overwhelming pressure while the women dealt with impossible competition for reproductive rights. If you thought gender imbalances were unethical, the next vault turned childhood into a eugenics program. Vault 75. This vault posed as a safe haven for children under Malden Middle School, but secretly implemented one of the most brutal eugenics programs in the series. Staff separated children from parents by executing adults on arrival, then subjected kids to extreme physical and mental testing. At age 18, failed subjects were killed while superior specimens had their genetic material harvested for further experimentation. Some successful subjects were promoted to staff positions to continue the cycle. Eventually, the enhanced subjects staged an uprising and overthrew their tormentors. Vault 75 in Fallout 4 represents Vault-Tec's most openly genocidal experiment, focused on creating super soldiers through child abuse and murder. But even that wasn't the darkest Vault experiment. Vault 76. This was officially a control vault, designed to open after 25 years for rapid surface reclamation. But the real experiment was psychological manipulation through hope and competition. The vault indoctrinated its 500 best and brightest residents to believe they alone were capable of rebuilding America, fostering extreme competitiveness and ambition. Overseers received ambiguous instructions about reclaiming nuclear silos, essentially programming vault dwellers to become post-war weapons of mass destruction. Vault 76 in Fallout 76 represents the most insidious experiment, using patriotism and hope as tools for manipulation. Vault 76 proves that the most effective brainwashing uses hope and pride instead of fear and despair. If you thought patriotic manipulation was subtle, the next vault went for direct biological warfare. Vault 87. This vault subjected residents to forced evolutionary virus experimentation in an attempt to create super soldiers through forced mutation. Most subjects died horribly or became super mutants, losing their intelligence and humanity in the process. Vault 87 became the source of the capital Wasteland's super mutant population in Fallout 3, showing how one vault's failed experiment could terrorize an entire region for centuries. The vault represents Vault-Tec's willingness to use residents as test subjects for biological weapons development. The experiment demonstrates that some scientific research is so unethical it creates monsters that outlive their creators. Vault 87 shows that trying to improve humanity through forced evolution creates mindless giants who hate everything. But the next vault was designed to test experimental technology on unwilling subjects. Vault 88. This vault served as a prototype facility for testing next-generation vault technology and experimental add-ons on residents. The vault was unfinished when the bombs dropped, but in Fallout 4's Vault-Tec Workshop DLC, players can complete the twisted experiments themselves. Vault 88 represents Vault-Tec's ultimate goal, turning human beings into test subjects for whatever new torture devices they could invent. The Vault shows how the company planned to use Vault residents as beta testers for increasingly sophisticated forms of psychological and physical manipulation. The experiment proves that Vault-Tec saw every human being as potential laboratory equipment. Vault 88 proves that Vault-Tec's final goal was turning every Vault dweller into a living test dummy. If you thought direct experimentation was cruel, the next Vault weaponized creativity itself. Vault 92. This Vault was populated entirely by musicians and subjected to audio experiments including white noise exposure and subliminal message brainwashing. The experiment tested whether creativity could be controlled and weaponized through sound-based psychological conditioning. The audio manipulation caused madness and violence among residents until the Vault was eventually overrun by wildlife. Vault 92 in Fallout 3 represents Vault-Tec's attempt to turn art into a weapon of social control. Vault 92 proves that even music becomes evil when Vault-Tec gets involved. But the next Vault tried the opposite approach with pacifism. Vault 94. This Vault was designed as a social experiment featuring a pacifist, communal society where no weapons were allowed, and all residents were taught to reject violence completely. The experiment tested whether pure non-violence could survive in the post-apocalyptic world, and the results were tragically predictable. Most residents perished after repeated external attacks and internal strife when their idealistic principles met wasteland reality. Vault 94 in Fallout 76 serves as a tragic example of how noble ideals often can't survive contact with brutal circumstances. The Vault shows that Vault-Tec was interested in testing the limits of human goodness as much as human evil. If you thought testing pacifism was cruel, the next Vault weaponized addiction recovery. Vault 95. This Vault housed former drug addicts trying to recover from their addictions, but after several years of successful rehabilitation, a large stash of chems was revealed to study relapse rates. The experiment deliberately sabotaged people's recovery efforts to observe how addiction would reassert itself under pressure. Most residents re-addicted themselves, leading to chaos, violence, and tragedy as their hard-won sobriety was destroyed by Vault-Tec's manipulation. Vault 95 in Fallout 4 represents one of the most psychologically cruel experiments, giving people hope for recovery then deliberately destroying it for scientific data. Vault 95 shows that Vault Tech thought the best way to study addiction was to deliberately cause relapses. But the next vault decided to experiment with environmental conservation. Vault 96. This Ark vault housed a small group of scientists tasked with preserving animal and plant life for post-war repopulation. But the AI secretly enforced harsh productivity quotas and punished failure with poison gas. When scientists attempted to destroy the controlling AI, it responded by gassing the entire vault population. The preserved animals and plants eventually escaped when the vault doors opened, creating new mutated species throughout Appalachia. Vault 96 in Fallout 76 shows how even environmental conservation becomes twisted when filtered through Vault Tech's corporate mentality. If you thought environmental protection was noble, the next vault was designed to never let anyone experience freedom. Vault 101. This vault was designed never to open, creating a permanent study of life under autocratic rule by the overseer. The experiment tested how long people could be kept in isolated dictatorship without rebellion or psychological breakdown. Eventually, manipulation and unrest led to rebellion and the player character's escape in Fallout 3. Vault 101 represents one of the series' most recognizable experiments: the complete denial of human freedom disguised as safety and security. The vault shows how easily protection can become imprisonment when those in charge have absolute power. But the next vault decided to drive everyone insane with chemistry. Vault 106. This vault released psychoactive drugs into the air supply after just 10 days, causing residents to experience hallucinations and violent behavior without any warning or explanation. The experiment tested the effects of involuntary chemical manipulation on human psychology and social structure. Inhabitants became completely deranged, with drug-induced hallucinations leading to violence and the complete breakdown of society. Vault 106 in Fallout 3 represents one of the most straightforward experiments: chemical warfare against the vault's own residents. The vault shows how quickly civilization collapses when reality becomes unreliable. If you thought chemical manipulation was horrific, the next vault created an army of clones. Vault 108. This vault featured a cloning lab that produced dozens of mentally unstable clones named Gary, while the overseer was given terminal cancer and the power systems were designed to fail halfway through operation. The experiment tested what would happen when cloning technology was left unsupervised in a failing system. The Gary clones eventually overwhelmed the scientific staff and killed most residents, now wandering the vault, endlessly repeating their own name. Vault 108 in Fallout 3 demonstrates how cloning experiments become horror shows when combined with inadequate oversight and failing infrastructure. But the next vault froze time itself. Vault 111. This vault placed all residents in cryogenic stasis under false pretenses, telling them it was for decontamination while actually testing the effects of long-term freezing on human subjects. The experiment tested whether humans could be successfully preserved for future use without their knowledge or consent. Power failures and staff deaths led to most residents dying in their frozen sleep, with only the sole survivor emerging 200 years later to begin Fallout 4. Vault 111 shows that Vault Tech thought the best way to preserve humanity was to freeze them without permission. If you thought cryogenic imprisonment was cruel, the next vault created digital hell. Vault 112. This vault placed residents in virtual reality pods controlled by the sadistic Dr. Braun, who used the simulation to torture them for his own amusement for over 200 years. The experiment tested how long human consciousness could survive in virtual environments while being subjected to endless psychological torment. Residents lived in the Tranquility Lane simulation where they could experience death and trauma repeatedly without dying, creating perfect psychological torture. Vault 112 in Fallout 3 represents the ultimate fusion of technology and sadism, using virtual reality to create personalized hell for every resident. But the next vault decided to test class warfare directly. Vault 114. This vault was designed to house social elites in drastically underfunded and uncomfortable conditions, while being overseen by someone specifically chosen for inexperience and incompetence. The experiment tested how wealthy, privileged people would react to sudden poverty and poor leadership. The vault was never fully occupied when the Great War began, but it represents Vault Tech's interest in studying class conflict and social reversal. Vault 114 proves that Vault Tech thought the best way to study privilege was to take it away and watch people suffer. And finally, the most openly elitist experiment, Vault 118. This vault provided ultimate luxury to a handful of wealthy and creative residents, while others served as their staff, testing class conflict and division within a closed system. The experiment examined whether extreme inequality could be maintained indefinitely in confined spaces. In Fallout 4's Far Harbor DLC, the Vault has become a murder mystery setting among the roboticized upper class, who continue their class-based society even after death. Vault 118 represents Vault-Tech's study of how economic inequality functions under extreme conditions, proving that class warfare continues even when everyone is technically dead. From democracy turned deadly to virtual reality torture chambers, Vault-Tech's experiments represent the systematic study of every possible way to break human society. Each vault tested different variables: overcrowding, isolation, chemical manipulation, artificial scarcity, technological dependence, and social engineering to determine how much suffering humans could endure before civilization collapsed. The vaults prove that the most dangerous enemy of humanity isn't radiation or mutants, but human curiosity without moral boundaries. This is the 7 levels of Fallout serial killers. Level 1. Trash killers. On this level, we have the Raider gangs, not a named character, as you can encounter several examples through all the games. For example, the ones of Fallout 3 are, in my opinion, the most savage depicted of the whole series. You can see his job on all your journeys through settlements, invaded buildings, and a variety of zones, all sharing a sinister atmosphere and horrible bodies scattered all around. One of the first examples that you can get is the first supermarket you commonly visit in Fallout 3, a dangerous place that, even before you enter, has a horrible depiction of what these raiders can and are willing to do. You can see bodies on pikes all around the nearby zones of the parking lot of the supermarket, burning bodies, screams of pain that can be heard at the far distance, and mutilated bodies. The horror. And then you enter the supermarket, bodies hanging on the ceiling, ones with less extremities that they should have, others with horrible marks on their body, and of course the raiders living there around all these bodies. Their job, of course. But all of this doesn't creep them out a little bit. If you aren't detected, you can even hear some chats about what they did to some of them and laugh, showing the decrease of humanity these kinds of people have. But these trash killers are far from the Level 2 killers. Level 2. Organized killers. Imagine these people, if you can call them that way, as an improved version of the Raiders scattered around the Mojave, and originally on Vault 15, that doesn't help them a little bit to be better human beings. This faction faces a bit of evolution towards a more civilized facet from the savages that they are on Fallout 2, to a bit less on Fallout New Vegas. The difference that makes them a bit over the normal Raiders are the fact that they have a more functional mind and the capability of using tactics. The Khans are more organized, have better control of the zones they fight for, and caring. If you could say that of his members, basically the difference is that they tend to take fights with a bit more brains to not sacrifice soldiers for nothing. See them as a raider-organized group specialized on attacking caravans and dealing drugs, with their other speciality being causing headaches to the NCR. This is pretty clear as they are involved in numerous skirmishes and kidnappings, which, bit by bit, ultimately provoked the NCR to respond in retaliation at the Bitter Springs Massacre. If you thought organized killers were bad, though, the next level will freak you out. Level 3. Ritualist. Killer. Fallout 4 bringed us a fleshed world that was seen from the POV of a person that lived both worlds, pre- and post-war, bringing us to this killer commonly known as Fenn's Phantom, that we originally know through Dear Detective tapes. Before tackling the tapes, we have to understand the context that we can learn outside the tapes, to get in a more clear way the context of this. First of all, he displayed the corpses and remains of his work underneath the fence, claimed as a base of operations by investigating him. And this only was known to a single detective that the killer single-handedly chose him to deliver some tapes. Overall, this showed that he felt heavy frustration with societal norms, viewing people as fake and transparent. So using that holotapes meant spreading his visions to all those that would listen, a little convoluted as those tapes only reached a single detective. Also, each macabre work that he created was accompanied by one or more X traced in chalk on a nearby wall, those X meaning the number of victims on the associated display. I point out the level 3 of this video because the tapes explored the psychology of the serial killer, and the results after the killer worked with the victims are a little left to interpretation. Let's look at them one by one to get a better feeling of the killer and what exactly he was looking for leaving the tapes. Tape 1 speaks to the detective about following the instructions in a correct way and ensuring that he is alone. After that, he says that you better be alone and that he put his work on display down there, encouraging the detective to see his work because that would make him happy. This first tape explains basically that the Fenn's Phantom was thrilled to be followed around, and at the same time, he already was one step or several in advantage. Tape 2 talks a bit about appreciating your surroundings and telling that he can feel like himself only on the sewers, as the life up there is exhausting and full of hypocritical people, as you have to smile to people that may not care about you one way or another, and he's happy to share it with the detective. Chills run through my spine. This tape shows that he is a loss of humanity, thinks that everyone can't truly care for each other, and justifies his killing as he only does what he does because it is the only way he can be himself. Tape 3 explains that is getting anxious about the ultimate meeting they will have, as nobody really knows him as well as the detective, telling him about the thrill he feels being the object of fascination of someone like him, and at the same time that eventually he will be of the Phantom, whatever it means. As we enter the aftermath of the chase that this detective had to live through to get the Phantom, we start to see what really moves him. Our final tape, number 4, finishes with a high and sad note. He starts saying that he didn't want him to hurt him and didn't want it to be hurted, but know everything has come to an end, forgiving him because it doesn't matter anymore, as they are now together with all the time in the world to know each other. With this, we understand 2 things. If you didn't get it, you can find the actual assassinations on the sewers, the skeletons, and the X with chalk on the wall is still there, well, for this final tape. And X, we find 2 on the wall and 2 skeletons, meaning only one thing. Both died on the struggle with the Phantom getting a bit of strength to mark the chalk, or he already had it planned, killed the detective and suicided, showing us that the killer only did what he did because he was a monster that only found satisfaction in killing while being chased for it. But these killers were nowhere near as crazy as the next level. Level 4, Sociopath Killer. This killer is very connected to our second level, but has his own category because even among all the disturbing and traumatizing things the raiders can do, he takes them to a whole newer level. He is known as Cook, a killer with a really high rank in the Fiends group, only being lower than Motor Runner, the leader. Never operates alone, and also has an inclination to eat his victims after doing disturbing things to them. He only targets smoothskins, a way of saying that he don't like doing what he does to mutants or ghouls. We talked about 3 levels already. The first 2 disturbing for killing and making display of their victims, but this one prefer to torture and do seriously disturbing things to his victims while they are alive. He is a sociopath. Why do you ask? He loves with an amorous affection his pet called Queenie, a Brahmin. Creepy at least, is getting only on the surface, because a person that can love so immensely a pet is still very much capable of doing horrible things to his victims. This type of monster is a potential and slowly growing problem as the Wasteland isn't the easier zone to maintain security and ensure law. Luckily, we can track him and find him in Poseidon gas station, where he also lets Queenie roam free grazing. After everything you learn about him, you can also learn from others, mostly slave traders, about his inclination to always have new meat. And if he can't get it, he buys it. What makes him also dangerous besides his craziness is that if someone touches Queenie, let alone kill her, he enters on a crazy frenzy, attacking everything and everyone near him. Yeah, also his teammates, showing the twisted mind he has. What a monster he was that if you go and talk with the victims after killing him, they will net you some good rewards as a thank you. Level 5, the leaders. We are entering on the most dangerous and disturbing levels of maniacs and really twisted people. But what makes this level the most dangerous is the mentality. The kind of people on this level are notorious for being normal in some aspects, or at least they can hide well enough. With some functionality on their mind, they are functional people in some way. But that doesn't mean letting out a monster when they want to. We are traveling all the way to Nuka World DLC on Fallout 4, specifically to talk about Dixie, a young woman that is a high-ranking member of the Disciples, a gang that is already centered on violence. But what level this is, that a young woman easily put his peers to shame and sticks out as the most bloodthirsty and dangerous in some cases. We can learn a lot about her different ways. One of the most prominent are the spectacle mounted on Fizztop Mountain. This is the lair of the Disciples, so you cannot expect a normal way of living. This gang is full of vicious raiders. So obviously, the decoration consists of things like human remains. Most of the mutilated corpses and trophies, or at least that's how she calls them, are souvenirs and holotapes provided by her victims, one way or another. The tapes can be listened to, and while they don't exactly share a story as everyone is independent of the other, well, they actually reveal the tactics, misdirections, persuasion, I could say, and basically all his girlish demeanor to talk their targets into letting their guard down, Also, one of the terminals around has an entry that talks about the leader of the gang deciding to elevate Dixie to that position as a means of maintaining her under control because she is a bit afraid of letting her run among the others and destroy the fragile peace between gangs with his intricate way of living. You as a character can try to persuade her to enslave his victims instead of killing them. Lose, if you ask me. And also can be a random encounter after dismantling the gang and not killing her. But ultimately, if you are on a normal route, killing her will be a must. This serial killer shows absolutely no remorse or interest in stopping its ways besides the brief interactions we can get. Still no way of redeeming it. And that is fine, as after everything she does, it is impossible to come back, in my opinion at least. Level 6. Tool, serial killer. We have explored a ton of situations where a serial killer can be born, as well as situations where a serial killer simply follows that path by conviction, pure joy, or as a twisted way of being alive. Now we shift the blame to not only them. Follow me on this. What about other killers that aren't exactly bad by themselves, but mostly follow an idea or are manipulated into following and defending a goal, most common through a larger organization or a political group with so much power? We are talking about Frank Horrigan, the main antagonist of Fallout 2, is the first on the list that isn't exactly a human, is more exactly a former human, now super cyborg mutant or something like that. For starters, was a giant man, the personal bodyguard of the President Dick Richardson until a hidden moment that was cataloged as an undocumented psychotic blunder that cost Frank his post, and the cause of being resigned to Wasteland patrol duty that at the same time also cost him his humanity. In one of those expeditions, he came into contact with the forced evolutionary virus in a military base and started mutating, so the Enclave sent him to the oil rig to study him. From here, if it wasn't enough, everything went downhill. As a variety of studies were tried on him, the problem is that those experiments were more similar to a torture and having a guinea pig instead of trying to help him. Much is said about having him on heavy sedation for a period of 2 years. After a lot, and I really mean in a lot of experiments, he became a super mutant, Josh machine, and also his physiology and mentality were shattered too. When they ran out of tests, the Enclave decided to redeploy him as an operative on the field. With a custom-engineered set of power armor with empowered supersized microfusion reactor, way better than the normal power armors of the Enclave. Nobody could match him as he was the single deadliest combatant in all of New California. The only one who could beat him is the Chosen One, the protagonist of Fallout 2. The most important factor about him being level 6 instead of maybe 1 up or down is the mentality he has. As you know, the super mutants have low intelligence. Maybe for the humans forced by the forced evolution virus? Even worse. And also add that the Enclave ran various conditioning programs on him and was under presidential direct orders. Now you know where I am going with this. A conditioned, almost unbeatable monster that follows orders without any sort of questioning and a twisted reality. This is shown as he speaks to all the Wastelanders, referring to them as muties, while the mutant is himself. That alone shows how broken he is. Now, talking particularly about assassinations, on August 30th, year 2241, he had the task of tracking and kinda capturing, recruiting an elder farmer whose knowledge could prove dangerous. A straightforward mission guided by an institution by pure probabilities. By misfortune of him, the Chosen One witnessed the execution, and curiously enough, Frank, who wasn't known for his mercy, let him live, his most crucial mistake, to that day. Now in the game, he also kills Matthew in a Brotherhood bunker located in San Francisco, again, while he was on a mission to acquire the vertibird plans. A lot of people he denomines peasants while you're exploring. There's some legends of their own comrades about what he is capable of doing, but in my opinion, all of what we already covered and his strange satisfaction for killing make him one of the most lethal serial killers, with the twist of covering his taste for killing with the reason of doing it for the mission. Level 7. Ideology. Killers. For the last level, I have 2 strong candidates, but one of them is from the TV series, so we will stick to the games as every serial killer we have covered comes from them in one way or another. The President, John Henry Eden, for anyone that don't know, he is an Zayax AI unit installed in the Raven Rock complex just northwest of Washington, D.C. For anyone that don't know, the President comes from a time pre-war and is loaded with data about the American story, and Eden's personality is based on an amalgamation or fusion. If you could see that way of every president that the nation knew, also borrowing all the cultural legends of every one of them, a bit of recipe for disaster if you ask me. For starters, he claims that comes from a rural Kentucky where he grew up. Abraham Lincoln roamed the countryside with his dog Honey from Knob Creek to Hodenville. The problem started when he slowly became self-aware and started studying all the extensive archives left to him, mainly from the American government, developing a new personality based on the database, particularly from all the American presidents. Fast forward to assuming the power of the president after the control station enclave blew up on Fallout 2, he started creating an army of robots and providing military technology to his human subordinates, successfully creating iBots, and started spreading the message of hope, and returned to the golden days of pre-war America. After this, the game starts, and we can prematurely see all the horrors of this genocidal politics. First of all, after getting his new personality, he designed a plan using Project Purity, the pivotal point of the story of Fallout 3. In simple terms, he wants to use a modified version of the forced evolutionary virus through the capital Wasteland's water supply. Because why not? This will effectively kill anyone that has any bit of genetic mutation. This doesn't only speak about ghouls, super mutants, or monsters. Basically, anyone besides the Enclave or the residents of the vaults without contact with the Wasteland are going to die. The plan is established as a full mass death plan on the capital Wasteland, and Eden is fully aware of it. He justifies it as a restart for the world, and consolidate the full control to only that faction that to this point anyone knows that is the government itself. Obviously, this is the major point of conflict in the game, and he is the highest level just because he wants to kill everything and anything that doesn't align with his vision of the world. And even if you think the same, good luck surviving, as the Enclave already has its numbers sealed. Some could think that is the typical ruler of the universe plan to destroy everything to rule nothing, and you're almost correct, as he is out of line, but the plan was not designed by Eden. It was designed by the previous computer, and the only reason that the plan couldn't go on is because of the player. In my books, that is the most near a serial killer would be of finishing with a whole country just by some decision of cleaning the ethnic. All the other serial killers were on a so much smaller cap, so Eden takes the crown as the worst serial killer that he could have been. You could argue that he didn't get to run his plan, but that doesn't make it any better, as the plan was in motion with all the consequences and massive amounts of death. Just being fine with the plan is becoming a serial murderer yourself. The pint-sized slasher. The pint-sized slasher began as an urban legend that parents in the Washington, D.C. area told to frighten misbehaving children, a boogeyman who would emerge from a dog kennel at dusk to chase kids with a toy knife. The legend captured the public imagination so completely that it became the second best-selling Halloween costume in pre-war America, only outsold by the heroic Captain Cosmos. But in 2052, this tale took a horrifying turn into reality with the infamous Linden Street slayings, which became a top story. Wearing a sinister clown mask, black and white striped shirt, and wielding an oversized chef's or butcher's knife. The only known survivor, a boy named Christopher Atkinson, witnessed the brutal murder of his brother Sean, and his eyewitness account, quoted by Police Chief Joseph Field, confirmed the killer was a male child, cementing the pint-sized aspect. The original slasher's identity was never discovered, and his fate was presumably sealed by nuclear annihilation. But his legend endured in ways that prove how deeply this horror had embedded itself in American culture. In Fallout 3, players can actually embody the killer within the Tranquility Lane virtual reality simulation in Vault 112, where the sadistic Dr. Stanislaus Braun tasks the lone wanderer with terrorizing and murdering simulated residents while disguised as the slasher. This interactive sequence forces players to participate in the violent dismantling of the pre-war facade, turning a happy, peaceful neighborhood into a slaughterhouse. Physical evidence of the slasher's activities, or those of a copycat, appears in Point Lookout, where his iconic mask is discovered in a gruesome, blood-soaked motel room, suggesting his murderous legacy continued far from DC. The legend resurfaces again in Fallout 4 through the Creation Club quest, A Pint-Sized Problem, introducing a post-war ghoul who, broken by the loss of his family, has become obsessed with the slasher myth and taken up the mantle himself. A note found on his body reveals his motivation. "No more will things be taken from me, I will do the taking now." But while the pint-sized slasher was a corruption of childhood innocence, the next killer turned art itself into an instrument of philosophical terror. The Fens Phantom. Operating in pre-war Boston, the Fens Phantom was a killer with a deeply philosophical bent who established his lair and gallery in the Fens Street sewer because he felt it was insulated from what he perceived as the hypocrisy of the world above. Through a series of 4 holotapes addressed directly to the detective hunting him, he reveals his disturbing motivations and worldview. He describes life on the surface as exhausting, a place where one must smile at people who don't care about you one way or another, and explains that it was only in the sewer, surrounded by his macabre creations, that he felt he could truly live. Phantom is believed to have murdered at least 24 people, and he didn't simply dispose of the bodies. He arranged their skeletal remains into grotesque, artistic tableaus throughout the sewer system. Each of these displays is marked with chalk X's on nearby walls, which likely denote the number of victims used in each specific art piece. This systematic documentation shows a methodical mind that viewed murder not as random violence, but as creative expression requiring careful cataloging and presentation. Over time, the Phantom developed a deep, almost romantic obsession with the unnamed detective on his trail, viewing him as a kindred spirit and the only person capable of truly understanding his work. He eventually contacted the detective directly, luring him into the sewer for what he clearly intended as a final, intimate confrontation. The fourth and final holotape implies the Phantom was victorious in this encounter, stating with obvious satisfaction, "It doesn't matter anymore. Now you're here with me, and we have all the time in the world to get to know each other." The ultimate fate of both the killer and his pursuer has become a subject of intense fan debate and speculation. One theory suggests a murder-suicide. A more popular theory posits that the Phantom actually survived the Great War in his sewer, with the ambient radiation slowly transforming him into the powerful glowing one that players must fight at the end of the location. A particularly intriguing extension of this lore connects the unnamed detective to Nick Valentine, whose memories were scanned by the Institute before he descended into the sewer for his final encounter with the Phantom. The Fenn's Phantom serves as a clear thematic precursor to the post-war killer Pickman, as both arrange their victims into artistic displays. If you thought artistic murder was disturbing, the next killer used corporate branding as his signature in ways that proved prophetic. The Nuka Killer. This pre-war serial killer operated in the Boston area and is known only through fragmented police terminal entries discovered by players 200 years later, making the investigation a cold case spanning centuries of nuclear winter. The investigation was a multi-jurisdictional effort involving Sheriff Taylor of the Nahant Sheriff's Department and Federal Officer A, showing how seriously law enforcement took this particular threat. Calling card earned him his distinctive name. He placed 2 Nuka-Cola bottle caps into the eye sockets of his victims after what appears to have been drowning them. All 3 of his known victims, a man named Gonzalez, another named Yavitz, were found in water-damaged clothing near large bodies of water. Disparate evidence is scattered across terminals at the Nahant Sheriff's Department, the East Boston Police Station, and the Coast Guard Pier, requiring players to piece together the full picture from multiple locations. Nuka-Cola was the most dominant brand in pre-war America. The killer co-opted this ubiquitous symbol of refreshment and turned it into a token of death, placing the caps where eyes should be as if to suggest his victims had been blinded by corporate propaganda. Like the other pre-war killers, the Nuka Killer's identity and ultimate fate were lost in the atomic fire of the Great War, existing only as a ghost in the machine, but his legacy lives on every time a Wastelander trades bottle caps for supplies, unknowingly participating in an economy founded on the same symbol a serial killer once used to mark death. While these pre-war killers revealed the rot beneath America's facade, the post-war world didn't create entirely new forms of evil. It just gave existing psychopathy new targets and justifications. Pickman, found in Boston's North End, this well-spoken and unnervingly polite man operates out of what he calls his gallery, and his entire character serves as a direct homage to H.P. Lovecraft's 1927 short story, Pickman's Model, which tells of a Boston artist whose horrifyingly realistic paintings of monsters are revealed to be drawn from life. Fallout 4's Pickman brings this concept into the post-apocalypse, with the Wasteland's raiders serving as his monstrous muses in ways that create profound moral ambiguity. He lures them into the tunnels beneath his gallery, where he tortures and kills them through methods that are clearly both prolonged and creative. He then uses their blood as paint and their dismembered bodies as components for grotesque sculptures that fill his gallery, creating art that is simultaneously horrifying and, given his choice of subjects, arguably serving a public service. To acquire new materials for his work, Pickman leaves calling cards on raider corpses he kills in the wild, notes taunting their comrades to come find him if they want revenge, each marked with a heart drawn in the victim's blood. This shows he's not content to wait passively for subjects, but actively hunts raiders throughout the Commonwealth, making him perhaps the most effective anti-raider force in the region. Players can discover the gallery after finding one of these cards during their travels, or can be directed to investigate by Hancock, the ghoul mayor of Goodneighbor, who has heard disturbing rumors. Upon arrival, players find the gallery under siege by a raider gang led by a particularly angry raider named Slab, who is seeking bloody revenge for his fallen men. Players must fight through these raiders to reach Pickman, who they find cornered in the tunnels below his gallery. Here, the game presents one of its most morally complex choices: kill Pickman as a dangerous psychopath, or save him from the raiders seeking his death. If players choose to save him, Pickman is genuinely grateful and provides them with a key to his personal safe, which contains the unique combat knife, Pikmin's Blade, a weapon that seems to carry some of his artistic obsession with it. This creates a disquieting parallel with the player character, who almost certainly has a much higher raider body count than Pikmin does. The encounter forces a moment of uncomfortable introspection. Pikmin serves as a dark mirror, reflecting what the player character could become if they allowed the violence of the Wasteland to consume their humanity entirely. But if you thought targeting raiders made killing morally ambiguous, the next killer chose victims completely at random for pure entertainment. Dixie. This high-ranking lieutenant in the Disciples represents not just individual psychopathy, but the absolute endpoint of an entire raider philosophy taken to its logical extreme. The Disciples are the most vicious and sadistic of the three raider gangs controlling the Nuka World theme park, and unlike the profit-driven operators or the Alpha Mentality Pack, the Disciples kill simply for the pleasure of it, embracing nihilistic violence as a lifestyle and art form. Terminal entries from other gang leaders reveal that the Disciples' leader, Nisha, promoted Dixie not out of merit or respect, but out of genuine fear. Nisha hoped that giving Dixie a position of authority and responsibility would keep her extreme psychopathy somewhat in check, but this strategy appears to have backfired spectacularly. Dixie's promotion only gave her more resources and opportunities to indulge her murderous compulsions on a larger scale. Dixie's primary weapon isn't her gun or knife, but deception wrapped in Southern charm. She carefully affects the persona of a polite Southern belle, using a sweet, honeyed accent and charming manners to lure unsuspecting victims into a false sense of security. This facade is so convincing that victims often remain hopeful even as she leads them to their deaths, believing until the very end that they might survive the encounter through negotiation or appeal to her better nature. Her personal quarters in Fizztop Mountain serve as a testament to her true nature and provide crucial insight into her psychology. The rooms are decorated with mutilated corpses arranged in artistic displays, but more disturbing is her collection of souvenir holotapes. These audio recordings capture the exact moments of her kills, specifically focusing on the psychological transition when she drops her charming mask and reveals her true intentions to victims. The tapes preserve their hope, turning to confusion, then terror, then desperate pleading, and finally silence. These souvenir recordings are crucial to understanding Dixie's psychology because they reveal she derives pleasure not just from the physical act of killing, but from the emotional torture and the complete shattering of her victims' hope. She feeds on the moment of realization when people understand they've been completely deceived and that their death is inevitable. The fact that she keeps and presumably replays these recordings suggests she relives these moments repeatedly, extracting ongoing satisfaction from each victim's despair. Players can encounter Dixie in several ways throughout the Nuka World questline. She may appear during random encounters in the Wasteland, casually asking players to help her decide which of her bound captives to kill first, treating murder as a casual entertainment choice like selecting a movie. Her tone during these encounters is consistently cheerful and conversational, as if discussing the weather rather than premeditated murder. Her ultimate fate depends entirely on player choices during the Nuka World storyline. She can remain a valuable ally if players choose to side with the Disciples and embrace their philosophy of violence for its own sake. Alternatively, she can be killed if players eventually turn against the raider gangs, or decide her methods are too extreme even for their criminal enterprise. If players do choose to kill her, her final word is reportedly a soft, contented "finally," suggesting that death represents not defeat, but simply another new sensation for her to experience. This reaction implies she views her own death not as tragedy, but as the natural conclusion to a life dedicated to exploring different forms of violence and suffering, including her own. Dixie represents what humanity can become when all moral and societal constraints have been absent for multiple generations, and cruelty is embraced not as a tool for survival, but as a fulfilling lifestyle choice. She's not a product of desperation or addiction like many raiders, but someone who has made evil into an art form and a source of personal fulfillment. While Dixie's madness was clearly a product of post-war chaos, the next killer's story remains shrouded in Appalachian mystery. The Sickleman. This enigmatic figure represents something unique in Fallout's approach to serial killer lore, a mystery that exists primarily through environmental storytelling and community investigation rather than direct narrative exposition. The Sickleman's story is told through a collaborative effort between game developers and players, creating an ongoing investigation that spans years of real-time speculation and theory building. Primary evidence of his existence is an unmarked cabin located near Vault 76 in Appalachia. Underneath the porch, players can discover a hidden crawl space that contains graffiti scrawled on the wall reading "Sickleman was here," accompanied by 4 headless skeletons and a rusted sickle. The scene is clearly meant to be discovered, arranged like a calling card or signature left by someone who wants their work to be found and recognized. His modus operandi appears to be decapitation using the sickle, and he leaves his victims' heads behind while taking the bodies for unknown purposes. This selective trophy taking suggests a specific psychological compulsion or ritual significance that goes beyond simple murder. The fact that he leaves the heads while taking the bodies implies the heads serve as his signature or message, while the bodies may serve some other purpose in his ritual or disposal method. The Sickleman's identity has become one of Appalachia's most hotly debated mysteries among players and lore enthusiasts. Two prominent theories have emerged, both connecting him to the mysterious Mothman cult, a connection supported by several pieces of environmental evidence. His lair overlooks Landview Lighthouse, which serves as a key ritual site for Mothman cultists, and the headless skulls he leaves behind bear similarities to the skull totems used in cultist ceremonies. The first theory identifies the Sickleman as Wesley Addington, a wealthy pre-war big game hunter whose story is told through holotapes found at his hunting lodge. In these recordings, Addington expresses growing boredom with hunting animals and a disturbing desire to begin hunting people instead, viewing human prey as the ultimate challenge for his hunting skills. Proponents of this theory argue that his distinct aristocratic accent matches that of a high-ranking Mothman cult leader heard on other holotapes throughout Appalachia. The second, more elaborate theory suggests the Sickleman is actually Wise Charles, a pre-war cultist who somehow survived the nuclear apocalypse and continues his murderous activities in the post-war world. This theory is supported by the proximity of his lair to other confirmed cult sites, and the consistent theme of decapitation that appears in various cult-related locations. Most compellingly, the Wastelanders update made a subtle but significant change to the graffiti, altering it from "Sickleman was here" to "Sickleman is here," implying the killer is still active rather than being a historical figure. Furthermore, during the seasonal Mothman Equinox event, observant players have noticed that a sickle appears on the table next to Wise Charles during cult gatherings, an item that is not present at other times. This detail suggests an ongoing connection between the character and the weapon associated with the murders. The Sickleman represents a fascinating evolution in Fallout's narrative design because, as a character in a live service game, his story has been subtly altered and expanded through game updates over time. This transforms players from simple discoverers of static lore into active participants in an ongoing cold case investigation. The community-driven effort to solve his mystery encourages continuous engagement with the game world and creates a sense that the mystery lives and breathes alongside the evolving game environment. This approach also reflects the reality of how serial killer investigations work in the real world. They're often collaborative efforts involving multiple investigators over extended periods, with new evidence and theories emerging over time. Lorenzo Cabot. Lorenzo Cabot represents perhaps the most complex and morally ambiguous figure in the entire Fallout universe, a character who transcends the typical definition of a serial killer to embody genuine Lovecraftian horror. Born in 1835, Lorenzo was a brilliant archaeologist whose life took a catastrophic turn in 1894 when he discovered a lost alien city buried deep in the Arabian desert. There, he unearthed a strange, crown-like artifact that would fundamentally alter not just his life but his very nature. The artifact fused permanently to his skull, granting him incredible and unnatural powers, true immortality, enhanced physical strength, and resilience that borders on the supernatural, and potent telekinetic abilities that allow him to kill with a thought. However, these gifts came with a terrible price. The alien influence gradually warped his mind, making him increasingly paranoid, violent, and utterly sociopathic. The Lorenzo, who emerged from the desert, was no longer entirely human, but something far more dangerous. By 1898, recognizing the growing threat his father represented to both his family and society at large, Jack Cabot made the difficult decision to have Lorenzo committed to a specially constructed cell in the basement of Parsons State Insane Asylum. For the next 400 years, Lorenzo remained imprisoned in this cell, effectively serving as both a prisoner and a living battery for his family's continued existence. Jack discovered that his father's unique alien-altered physiology could be exploited to create a remarkable serum from Lorenzo's blood. This serum halted the aging process entirely, allowing Jack, his mother, and his sister to achieve practical immortality. For 4 centuries, the Cabot family used Lorenzo's suffering to fuel their unnaturally long lives, making them parasites who sustained themselves on their patriarch's imprisonment and pain. Players become entangled in the Cabot family's dark affairs when hired by Jack to investigate mysterious activities at the asylum. This leads to a crisis when mercenaries launch a raid attempting to free Lorenzo, forcing players to confront the reality of the family's situation and the nature of their prisoner. The climax of the questline, The Secret of Cabot House, places players directly before Lorenzo's cell evil and forces them to make one of the most consequential moral decisions in the entire game. Honor Jack's desperate request to kill his father and end the threat forever, or side with Lorenzo and set him free from his centuries of imprisonment. If players choose to kill Lorenzo, they eliminate his threat permanently, but also doom the Cabot family to begin aging and eventually dying naturally after centuries of artificial life extension. Jack rewards this choice with 500 caps and Lorenzo's artifact gun, a unique gamma gun that has been modified with the Alien Crown's telekinetic technology, creating a weapon that literally harnesses otherworldly power. If players choose to free Lorenzo, his first act upon release is exactly what Jack warned it would be. He seeks immediate and brutal vengeance against the family that imprisoned him. Lorenzo travels directly to Cabot House and systematically murders his entire family using his telekinetic powers, crushing them to death or throwing them against walls with the force of his mind. As a reward for this liberation, he provides players with a lifetime supply of his mysterious serum, an exceptionally powerful consumable that grants significant combat bonuses and represents a share in his alien-enhanced physiology. But Lorenzo's story doesn't end with his family's death. If freed, he can be encountered randomly throughout the Commonwealth in scenarios that confirm Jack's warnings about his sociopathic nature. Players may find him standing over the fresh corpses of innocent ghoul settlers, calmly explaining that he killed them to study their radiation syndrome, which he finds has a striking similarity to my own condition. These encounters serve as chilling reminders that the player has become directly complicit in the murders that follow Lorenzo's release. Lorenzo's random appearances also raise disturbing questions about his ultimate goals. His interest in studying radiation's effects on humans suggests he may be conducting his own experiments, possibly attempting to understand how his alien-altered condition relates to the mutations caused by nuclear radiation. This implies he views post-war humanity not as people deserving protection, but as test subjects for his ongoing research into the nature of his own condition. The moral complexity of the Lorenzo situation extends far beyond a simple choice between good and evil. The Cabot family's actions are deeply immoral. They have essentially enslaved their patriarch and used his suffering to sustain their own lives for centuries. They are parasites in the most literal sense, drawing life from someone else's pain. Siding with Jack means upholding and perpetuating this fundamentally corrupt arrangement. However, Lorenzo represents an even more immediate and undeniable evil. His alien-influenced mind no longer recognizes human life as having inherent value, and his immortal nature means he will continue killing forever unless stopped. The choice forces players to decide between supporting a corrupt but stable situation or unleashing an ancient evil to punish a different, more personal form of evil. The subsequent random encounters serve as stark, bloody reminders that moral choices in the Fallout universe have real consequences that extend far beyond the immediate moment of decision. Every ghoul settlement Lorenzo destroys, every innocent person he kills in his research, represents the price of the player's choice to free him. The game doesn't allow players to make this decision and then forget about it. It forces them to confront the ongoing consequences of their moral choices. Lorenzo Cabot ultimately represents the point where Fallout's serial killer lore transcends human psychology entirely and enters the realm of cosmic horror. His actions aren't driven by trauma, desperation, or even human sadism, but by an alien intelligence that fundamentally doesn't understand or value human life. He embodies the terrifying possibility that some forms of evil are so alien and incomprehensible that they can't be reasoned with, reformed, or contained, only destroyed or unleashed. These seven figures, the pint-sized slasher, Fenn's Phantom, Nuka Killer, Pickman, Dixie, Sickleman, and Lorenzo Cabot, top USSA, represent the full spectrum of serial killer psychology in the Fallout universe. From childhood corruption to alien-influenced cosmic horror, they serve as crucial narrative elements that add layers of intimate, psychological terror to the grand-scale devastation of nuclear apocalypse. The pre-war killers, the slasher, Phantom, and Nuka Killer, reveal that the rot was always present beneath America's idyllic facade, proving that the darkness wasn't created by the bombs, but simply given new opportunities to flourish. Their stories, discovered like time capsules buried in computer terminals and holotapes, demonstrate that the supposed golden age of pre-war America was already plagued by profound psychological sickness. The post-war killers, Pickman, Dixie, and the Sickleman, represent how this darkness evolved and adapted to the lawless reality of the Wasteland. They're not rebelling against a structured society because no such society exists anymore. Instead, they're natural extensions of a world defined by violence, channeling their compulsions toward raiders, innocent travelers, or mysterious ritual purposes that may connect to larger supernatural forces. Lorenzo Cabot stands alone as a bridge between worlds, his ancient, alien-induced madness, making the brutality of both the old world and the new seem almost mundane by comparison. He represents the ultimate horror, evil so ancient and otherworldly that it transcends human understanding entirely. Almost every vault experiment in Fallout is horrifying, because that's the point. They were meant to test what people would do in horrible situations, and some will make you question the sanity of the devs that created them. So with that cheerful note out of the way, let's go traumatize ourselves. Vault 13, Death of a Vault Dweller. Let's start with the very first vault shown in the series, Vault 13. Vault 13 was initially presented as a control vault, a vault without an experiment. But here's the question. If Vault 13 was supposed to be a normal vault, no weird social experiment, no cartoon villain overseer, then why did it still end up producing exile, rebellion, and eventually a full-scale Enclave abduction? Was Vault 13 ever truly a control group, or was normal just another kind of trap? Vault 13, located somewhere in California, often speculated to be near Mount Whitney, was presented as one of the safest bets in the Vault Tech lineup. Nothing flashy, no obvious gimmick, just a sealed community built to outlast the bombs. That illusion held until 2161, when the Vault's water chip failed, turning normal life into a countdown to life or death. The Overseer draws straws and sends out one resident, later remembered as the Vault Dweller, on December 5, 2161, to find a replacement. Inside the Vault, most residents keep going as if routine will save them. But a rebel faction forms, convinced the Overseer is hiding the truth about the surface and eager to see the world for themselves. The Vault Dweller returns 5 months later with the chip, saving everyone, only to be forced out anyway. You're a hero, and you have to leave. That exile doesn't just remove a person, it fractures the Vault's identity. The rebels finally act, leaving Vault 13 to follow the unknown future that the Vault Dweller proved was possible. The Overseer is overthrown, possibly killed, because the record becomes conveniently fuzzy, and in a move that's both logical and darkly ironic, the remaining residents replace human leadership with a control computer purchased from the Brotherhood of Steel, trading one Overseer for a machine that can't be bribed, guilted, or appealed to. For decades, it worked. That is, until 2241, when the Enclave arrives with a coded all-clear signal, claiming the surface is safe and it's time to emerge. The vault opens. A family of 3 unseals the door, only to meet an Enclave Verdi assault team. They're immediately gunned down, later labeled as resisting capture, the kind of excuse that only sounds believable if you've never met the Enclave. The rest of Vault 13 is kidnapped and flown to the Enclave oil rig for use in a world-ending aerosol plan. And as a final insult, Vault 13 becomes a dumping ground for supposedly failed intelligent Deathclaw experiments, except the Deathclaws aren't dumb at all. They're merely pretending. They turn the vault into their own community, limited less by intelligence than by the inconvenient fact that claws aren't great for pressing small buttons. From there, Vault 13's ending splits into possibilities. Extermination, capture, or survival through a voice module that lets Deathclaws interface with the Vault's systems. The good ending is famously bugged in-game, but fans point to later intelligent Deathclaw traces as evidence that it might still be the intended canon. So what was the point of bringing up Vault 13 first? Well, it matters because it exposes a brutal truth. Even when a vault looks normal, it's still vulnerable to engineered dependence, internal fracture, and external manipulation. The failure of the water chip shows how a single logistical weakness can control an entire society. The exile shows that even salvation can be punished if it threatens authority, and the Enclave's infiltration of Vault 13 ultimately proves the vault wasn't just a shelter, it was a resource waiting to be claimed. And that raises the question this video hopes to answer. If this is what happens to one of the most standard vaults ever built, then what did Vault Tech do to the vaults that weren't meant to be normal at all? Let's move to the next vault, where the experiment isn't a hidden twist. It's the entire point. Vault 8, literally, 1984. Do you think the world today is dystopian enough? Cool, because Vault City is what happens when what Vault Tech deems as civilization not only survives the apocalypse, but then immediately decides the real enemy is everyone else. The scary part isn't that Vault City is evil, it's that Vault City thinks it's ethical. Vault City, formerly Vault 8, presents itself as a pristine model society. Clean streets, bright lights, neat and tidy uniforms, and a proper government unlike most of the Wasteland. But that shine comes with a price tag. Massive walls, heavy turrets, and a rigid social order that separates citizens from everyone deemed too poor, too dirty, or too wasteland to belong. If you don't meet their standards, you don't get welcomed. Quite the opposite, actually. You get managed, kept outside the gates, and treated like a necessary inconvenience. And the rules don't stop at the front door. Vault City City leans hard into controlled living, strict civic expectations, tightly monitored behavior, and leadership that speaks to people like they're components in a machine, to the point that their welcome booth has a citizen who relies on nothing but a pamphlet to even communicate with you. Even the little details are telling. When a place starts obsessing over who's fit, pure, and acceptable, you're not looking at a community anymore. You're looking at a filter. But a filter for what? Here's the twist, if you didn't already see it coming. Vault City wasn't even one of the crazy experiment vaults, so why does it feel like one anyway? By 2241, Vault City's biggest crisis wasn't starvation or raiders. It's that the outside world refused to disappear. Their neighbor, the ghoul town of Gecko, created both a problem and a solution. Gecko's reactor helps keep Vault City powered, but it also creates tensions over contamination and undesirables. That dependency makes Vault City furious, because it proves a humiliating truth. Their perfect society still needs help from people they look down on, so they do what they always do, try to outsource their morals. You'll see officials who want compromise, but you'll also see voices in power pushing for harsher options, including using mercenaries to solve problems permanently. Vault City doesn't just fear the Wasteland. It wants the Wasteland to stay weak, so Vault City can stay superior. This is why Vault City is so important. Even without a flashy Vault Tech gimmick, it becomes a very intentional prototype for what the Enclave mindset, the same one that gave rise to Vault Tech and what vaults are known for today, looks like in practice: order through exclusion, safety through segregation, and progress that only applies to the chosen few. Vault City isn't a cautionary tale about chaos without order. It's a warning about stability without empathy. So if Vault City shows what happens when a control vault succeeds, then the next vault we need to talk about is the one where the cruelty wasn't a byproduct, it was the plan from day one. Vault 77, Puppet or Puppeteer. Vault Tech didn't just love hostile environments, they especially loved impossible ones. Thus, Vault 77 decides to ask one of the nastiest questions of all. If you lock one person away with nothing but silence, how long before they invent a second voice and start not only believing, but doing what it tells them? Picture this: the Great War hits, the door seals, and it's just one man in a vault. No family, no neighbors, no routine, just the hum of machinery in a cardboard box. The moment he understands he's truly alone, he collapses. Days of pounding on the vault door, begging for an answer that never comes. After days and weeks without an answer, he opens the box. Inside, there's hand puppets, a Vault Boy mascot, a grandmother, a king, and a dog. It's almost funny, until you realize the joke is an experiment. Isolation isn't the background, it's the weapon. This is Vault Tech, stripping away every stabilizer humans rely on: community, accountability, critical thinking, just to see what replaces it. And at first, what replaces it looks harmless, like nothing more than simple make-believe, kind of like what video games are to people: distractions or coping mechanisms from the real-world hustle and bustle. When you have no one, your brain doesn't stay quiet, it improvises. So the man does what a lonely mind always does. He tells stories, he assigns roles, he makes the puppets talk because someone has to talk. The grandmother bakes pies, the king makes grand declarations, the dog barks on cue. It's childish, sure, but it's also survival. He's building companionship out of scraps, stitching a social world together with nothing but fabric and desperation. This is the key tragedy of Vault 77. It starts as coping, but coping can rot into dependency when there's nothing real left to anchor you. And then one puppet stops following the script. But the Vault Boy was different. The Vault Boy spoke to the man. It said things that he didn't make it say. Not comforting things, not helpful things. Devious things, cruel things. One night, the king had been murdered, with the Vault Boy initially taking responsibility, but later revealing it was the man who had murdered the king. That's the core horror of Vault 77. Whether it's possession or projection, the result is the same. The line between actor and audience collapses. The Vault Boy puppet becomes different, not looking different, acting differently, speaking differently. That's when the vault stops being a shelter and turns into a tragic comedy. No longer just a puppet. The thing that looks like a Vault Boy in puppet form speaks to the man, not comforting things, devious, cruel things. And the moment that puppet talks without being made to talk, the line between imagination and authority collapses. Then comes the murder. One night, the king is ripped apart, and the Vault Boy puppet takes credit, only to reveal it was the man himself. Possession or projection, whatever, it doesn't matter. The outcome is identical. The man no longer knows where he ends, and the puppet begins. That's the core horror. Vault 77 doesn't just drive him insane, the Vault Boy puppet gives his worst impulses a voice he can blame, obey, and hide behind. And once that voice exists, it doesn't stay inside the vault. Leaving the vault doesn't cure the damage, it simply takes it outside. He finally tries to leave, only to find a warehouse-sized rad scorpion waiting outside, like the Wasteland itself is guarding the punchline to a long, stale joke. After that, he moves through the world in fragments. A ghoul from a worse vault, a giant ant he rides, and raiders he kills at the puppet's urging. At that point, the puppet isn't entertainment anymore. It's permission, something he can wear on his hand and call the reason. People don't fear him because he's any kind of tactical genius. They fear him because he's proof that a human mind can become a weapon when it's hollowed out the right way, even with something as friendly and non-threatening as a hand puppet. And the Wasteland does what it always does with cowardice and superstition. It turns it into a legend. Vault 77 didn't just break the man it held captive. It created a myth that outlived him. He became known as the Puppet Man, a name whispered by raiders and slavers, like a campfire horror story. Years later, he holed up in a house demanding tribute from anyone who entered, not so much to enrich himself, but more to keep the puppet happy. And even by 2277, 200 years after Vault 77 was sealed, the sight of a Vault 77 jumpsuit was enough to make hardened raiders and slavers panic. That's the final cruelty. Vault-Tec didn't just run an experiment. They manufactured a roaming consequence, an urban legend built from isolation, paranoia, and a puppet that may have never spoken at all. So if Vault 77 shows what happens when one mind collapses in private, the next vault begs an even worse question. What happens when Vault-Tec makes an entire community part of the breakdown? Vault 34. Bing bang boom. Vault 34 is what happens when Vault-Tec hands a stressed, confined population an entire armory and says, good luck, because once you pack a vault with guns and ammo instead of living space, the real experiment becomes simple. Will the residents protect each other or aim their gun sights on each other instead? America, land of the free, home of the brave, right? Vault 34 took that slogan and turned it into interior design. A big chunk of its living space wasn't more housing or more food storage. It had a state-of-the-art fitness facility, a massive pool, and an overstocked armory. If you weren't into guns and ammo, daily life was basically living inside a gun nut's wet dream. And to make it even stranger, the US Air Force treated the vault like a storage locker, using it to stash a prototype pulse pistol meant for the Chinese and their experimental power armor. So Vault 34 isn't just a vault with weapons. It's a pressure cooker where power, access, and identity are all tied to who controls the guns. And once you give people that kind of leverage, it's only a matter of time before someone tries to use it. Vault 34 doesn't fall to raiders, external conquest, or simply being abandoned. Not right away, at least. It falls to politics. Armed politics. Sometime before 2231, the dwellers revolted against their overseer to leave. And like most freedom movements in tight confined spaces, it wasn't clean. During the chaos, the vault flooded and the nuclear reactor was sabotaged. Systems that should have been monitored, but weren't, especially once maintenance collapsed. The revolt kept everyone's attention on the conflict, so the water and radiation threats didn't come like a slow warning. They hit like a delayed detonation. Years later, by 2281, the surviving inhabitants weren't sore losers whose way of life was proven wrong. They were prisoners of their own making, trapped in an irradiated, failing prison that needed outside rescue. That's the point. The revolt wins, but the vault loses. Vault 34 becomes a cautionary tale about how internal conflict can destroy the infrastructure you depend on to live. And the damage doesn't stay inside the vault either. It bleeds into the wasteland. Vault 34 turns into an environmental problem with a body count. That sabotaged reactor doesn't just ruin the vault. Its radiation spreads far enough to taint the nearby NCR sharecropper farm harvests, turning local food production into collateral damage. This isn't a simple case of, whoops, we set the air conditioning too high. This is the kind of failure that poisons communities that never even stepped inside the vault. So Vault 34's experiment doesn't end with its residents. It creates a long-term regional hazard that reshapes an entire community's economic prospects, and not for the better. But here's the part that makes Vault 34 infamous. Its greatest legacy wasn't the contamination. It was the survivors. The boomers are Vault 34's quote-unquote successful outcome. And that's a terrifying sentence to anyone familiar with them. Around 2231, the dwellers who left didn't integrate. They armed themselves even further beyond the ludicrous firepower Vault 34 gave them. Pulling gear from places like the Hawthorne Army Depot and Area 2, they treated Wastelanders as savages, responding with absurd precision and even more absurd overkill. Eventually, they found Nellis Air Force Base and made it home, transforming isolation into doctrine. Over time, they got restless. Some fell in love with the outside world through binoculars, others socialized by shelling anyone who wandered too close. The pinnacle of Vault 34's weapon fanatism. A weapon-stocked vault doesn't just create armed people or a polite society. It created a culture that normalized violence as communication. And if Vault 34 shows what happens when you arm a community until it becomes a fortress, the next vault asks something even nastier. What happens when the vault itself is designed to push people into fighting? Vault 118, magnates of murder. We've all hated a boss. But Vault 118 asks a decidedly more sinister question. What if your bosses weren't just annoying? What if they considered themselves so far above ordinary people that they'd rather seal you and your coworkers out of sheer pettiness than share a bunker with you? Vault 118 was supposed to be another class experiment. 10 ultra-elite residents and 300 working-class residents trapped together, with the workers given limited food and space while the elites lived in comfort. Essentially a testing power play, with scarcity and exploitation imposed upon the far larger working class. But when the Great War hit, the elites didn't wait around to see how that would play out. They shut the entrance and kept the vault for themselves, turning it into a private luxury resort instead of Vault Tech's intended social experiment. So the experiment flips. Instead of the idea of how will the rich treat the poor or how long the poor will withstand being exploited by the rich, it became the question of what happens when the rich never have to face consequences at all. That is, until they try to cheat the one thing money can't buy forever. Vault 118 became a museum exhibit of pre-war ego, talent, fame, brilliance, and zero accountability. The vault's residents were a who's who of status: a world-famous painter, a General Atomics inventor and his wife, movie stars, and other high-profile innovators. To preserve their paradise, the inventor persuaded the group to transfer their minds into robo-brain bodies for near immortality, swapping death by old age into an eternal country club, metal chassis included. All yours, for the price of everyone else. That choice matters because it removes the natural endpoint that forces reflection. If you make it so that you'll live forever, you can make it so you never really have to experience guilt forever too. But immortality doesn't stop human greed. It just gives it more time to take effect. Vault 118's real collapse isn't mechanical, it's moral. After about 210 years, the fantasy finally shatters when Ezra Parker, an investor, kills Juliana, the wealthy heiress wife of Burt Riggs, after she discovered that he had been embezzling her money before the war to fund Vault 118 and buff his own finances. To maintain the illusion, Ezra takes Juliana's place, an identity swap that only reveals his true nature. Burt suspects something is off, but he's too consumed by his work to fully confront it. That's the real horror of Vault 118. The elite don't just avoid consequences, they will try to rewrite and reshape reality to escape them. And then, just when Ezra thinks he can keep its secrets buried, an outsider walks in. A visitor from Vault 111 arrives, someone with no stake in the social hierarchy. Perfect for the residents to ask for help solving the murder. Sounds like a certain type of detective story. From there, the investigator can dig up the truth or slap a name on the crime and leave. Either way, the Vault's paradise keeps running unless someone wipes everyone out. But the important thing has already happened. Their sealed ecosystem has been punctured, and with it, the dissolution of the comforting illusion that wealth makes you untouchable. Vault 118 ultimately delivers Vault Tech's intended lesson, just not through worker revolt. Instead, the elite get a taste of reality through the betrayal of their own. On the note of class division, we'll take a trip to West Virginia to see what's been going on over there. Vault 63. Storm over Skyline Fallout's pre-war America didn't just collapse because of inflation, resource shortages, or war paranoia. It collapsed because the people with power kept building escape hatches that only worked for them. And nowhere is that uglier than when a safe haven stops being a shelter and becomes a private laboratory for the ultra-elite. In Skyline Valley, Shenandoah National Park is no longer protected land, it's carved up into corporate and federal exploitation sites. A natural gas well is installed by the Beisch Company and later tied to covert assassination. The Brown House, a historical national park version of the White House, gets reduced to a hollow photo op for the last president. And then Stoltz Enterprises, a Vault Tech affiliate, goes even further. It buys a plot in the dead center of the park and drops a grand mansion on it. That's the pattern. When the wealthy can't control the world, they purchase a smaller version of it, and whatever they make within it it, whatever it may be, is called progress. Vault 63 is a perfect case study because it blurs the line between Vault-Tec experiment and elite contingency plan. And that ambiguity is the point. Vault 63 is described as Vault-Tec's largest in width, with sprawling wings across the former park and distinct research focuses: biology, chemistry, and most importantly, meteorology. It's not framed like a standard vault setup. It looks like a prestige project. Big, specialized, and built to impress. Kinda sounds like they were compensating for something. It's literally housed beneath a grandiose private mansion owned by Stoltz Enterprises, meaning the vault's existence is tied directly to the kind of wealth and influence that Appalachia keeps warning you about. So even if someone argues that this vault doesn't feel like an experiment, that's exactly why it matters. Because the experiment here isn't a single switch Vault-Tec flipped. It's what happens when the worst of pre-war society is sealed together and treated as property by the elite. And then the vault's one big promise, control, fails in the most Fallout way possible. The vault isn't completely constructed when the bombs drop, leaving everyone inside exposed. Like Vault 12, Vault 63 can't fully seal, which means nuclear fallout leaks in and the population becomes ghoulified. But because this is the early 2100s, ghouls are not a known category yet, people don't understand what's happening, what going feral means, or what comes next. Enter Hugo Stoltz, CEO of Stoltz Enterprises and overseer of the vault. Instead of accepting limits, he reaches for a shortcut, a failed government device he purchases anyway: Atlas, the atmospheric terraforming laser accelerator system. He even brings in Lieutenant Colonel James Oberlin to justify why something that dangerous belongs anywhere near a vault. Then the personal stakes hit. The ghouls turn feral fast. Hugo's brother turns, and his wife Cassidy shows signs of going feral herself. Hugo responds like an executive, not a husband or family man. He throws out safeguards and pushes activation as soon as possible, bringing his wife with him when he flips the switch. The result is immediate and brutal. Hugo is blinded. Cassidy falls into a coma, and an electromagnetic pulse surges through Vault 63, transforming many inhabitants into a new ghoul variant, the Lost. That's not a random accident. It's escalation psychology, the same mindset that decided to build a mansion in a national park. Hey, ask Nuka-Cola how well that worked out for Nuka World. When control slips, the powerful don't share risk. They magnify it, because they believe the rules exist for everyone else. The cruelest part is what comes next. The disaster doesn't remove Hugo's influence. It hardcodes it into the people he just destroyed. The Lost operate on Hugo's business-minded, logic-driven mentality, but corrupted and mind-controlled. Even after Atlas fails, Hugo doesn't stop being the center of gravity. He becomes the shepherd behind a new kind of horror. Oberlin forbids another activation, and the machine is damaged enough that rebuilding requires new parts. Audrey, Hugo's daughter, sees what he's become and rejects it, because grief doesn't excuse tyranny. And when a Vault 76 dweller arrives, the story crystallizes into outcomes that are all about power. Either help Hugo activate Atlas and turn the remaining sane ghouls into mind-controlled slaves, imprison Hugo with Oberlin, or work with Audrey to lock both self-destructive forces away. In other words, the Vault's experiment isn't just meteorology or technology, it's authority under pressure, and what an elite leader is willing to do when the people around him stop being people. Some would say there is a duality of man, and Vault-Tec certainly goes out of its way to show the best and worst humanity is capable of. On that note, let's head over to Boston really quick. Vault 88, Vault-Tec Fulfillment Center Alt 88, is one of the few times Fallout shows Vault-Tec's cruelty as a repeatable process. Not just a one-off horror story, but a production line for human experimentation. The setup is explicit. Overseen by Dr. Valerie Barstow, the Vault exists to test prototype systems meant for rollout across other vaults after 2078, under the direction of figures tied directly to Vault-Tec's grand societal preservation plan, including Dr. Stanislaus Brown, the same brawn connected to Vault 112. The experiments weren't designed as isolated curiosities. They were intended as mass-produced experiments within experiments. The Vault gives a sharp lens into how Vault-Tec operates. It reveals the infrastructure of experimentation, how the company standardized cruelty so it could be copied, shipped, and scaled. Vault 88's story becomes more disturbing after the Great War because the Vault was never finished, but the experiments can still be revived and deployed on people who never consented to any of it. When you explore Vault 88, you find the construction crew now feral and the Vault split between intact and unfinished sections. But the critical detail is that the experimental data survives elsewhere, stored at the nearby Vault-Tec Regional HQ. That means Barstow isn't stuck reinventing anything. She can recover the archived protocols and restart testing immediately. The only difference is the target population, not pre-war citizens. options, but the Wastelanders of the Commonwealth, people with fewer protections, fewer choices, and fewer ways to fight back. This reframes Vault-Tec's evil as something even worse than mad or evil science. It's bureaucratic continuity, because society may crumble, but the paperwork survives, and the paperwork is the weapon. Which brings us to the real question Vault-88 asks. Are Vault-Tec's experiments unethical because of what they are, or because of how easily they can be adjusted? Vault-88 shows that Vault-Tec didn't just design experiments, they designed experiments with adjustable ethics. Like cruelty was a feature you could configure depending on what your manager needed that week. The 4 core prototypes, the Power Cycle 1000, Soda Fountain, Phoropter, and Slot Machine, each come with 3 configurations. An overtly abusive Vault-Tec setting, a compromise setting designed by Team Walrus, and a genuinely beneficial version created by the team of one Ted Riley. This isn't accidental. It's a system that turns morality into a menu, harmful, ambiguous, or helpful, all at the flip of a switch or the press of a button. This is one thing you won't be asking for fries with. And when you look at what the default Vault-Tec versions do, you see exactly what kind of company would treat ethics like a setting on a machine. The Vault-Tec versions of the prototypes make the intended purpose unmistakable. Maximize compliance, extract productivity, and accept death as an acceptable byproduct. The Power Cycle 1000 can shock riders to squeeze out more power, up to spontaneous combustion and death. The Soda Fountain dispenses appetite-suppressant soda that drives unnatural weight loss and can escalate into fatal refusal to eat. The Phoropter uses subliminal messaging that produces headaches and can kill, and the Slot Machine turns gambling into coercion. It manipulates probabilities to lure players in, then traps them in a loss spiral that effectively locks them into indentured servitude, ensuring the vault fills its pockets while stripping away free will. Fitting for Las Vegas, only 3,000 miles away. But Vault-Tec doesn't only show the worst version, it also shows what the company considered an acceptable compromise, and that middle ground is revealing in its own way. The second configuration, created by a Team Walrus, still had Vault-Tec ideals in mind, but with a more neutral approach. Power cycles instead of shocking riders, dosed riders with buff-out, capable of making them ride for days, as well as thinking that it was the bike that made them stronger instead of the chem. Team Walrus's Soda Fountain didn't use an appetite suppressant, but instead a mood enhancer made by Hallucigen Inc. Their Phoropters were far more invasive, utilizing Rorschach tests to get glimpses into the minds of those who used it, with the default programming including traitor, inefficiency, gossip, complaint, and kitten. Finally, the Slot Machine's neutral configuration was to provide a standard game of chance, but also detect who was playing and identify deviants and degenerates without the player knowing. You've seen Vault-Tec and you've seen Team Walrus, but out of many, if not all, Vault-Tec scientists, Ted Riley is probably the most ethical pre-war person to ever work for Vault-Tec. Every one of his team's experiments were not only beneficial to Vault-Tec, but to the user as well. However, both Valeri and the R&D head both highly disapproved of Ted's objectively beneficial configurations. That didn't stop Ted though, which led to the Power Cycle emitting essential oils and pleasant music to create a wondrous experience for the rider. The Soda Fountain was plain, ordinary caffeine, but enhanced to surpass even the taste and hydration of Nuka-Cola. The Phoropter actually enhanced the eyesight of those who used it. And finally, the Slot Machine could be adjusted to lose the vault money at the cost of endless winnings for whoever used it. Obviously, Valeri Barstow prefers that the Vault-Tec configurations are used for the experiments, to the hatred of Wastelanders everywhere, but she won't mind the neutral option being used. She will, though, walk out on anyone who only uses the beneficial options devised by Dr. Ted Riley. It took 210 years, but the experiments of Vault-88 could finally be unleashed upon the Wasteland, to the delight, hatred, or simply no reaction of Wastelanders everywhere. Almost every vault in Fallout is horrifying, because that's the point. They were experiments meant to test what people would do in horrible situations. But there are some that are so bad, they'll make you question the sanity of the devs that created them. So with that cheerful note out of the way, let's go traumatize ourselves. First things first, let's cover Ol Reliable. Vault 22, the green hell. In every other vault, you eat plants. In Vault 22, the plants eat you. Vault 22 is easily one of Fallout's most infamous vaults, and does deserve a spot on this list. I don't know, it just feels like everyone who has made a video on vaults or New Vegas has talked about it, and I'd be torn apart in the comments section if I didn't cover it here. So here we go. The vault was staffed by pre-war scientists trying to solve global hunger by genetically modifying crops. It's a noble idea, since even ignoring the rest of the world who are undoubtedly doing worse, by the 2070s in the USA international trade had collapsed, the US population had ballooned past 400 million, and shortage riots becoming more and more common. Feeding America was becoming a problem. Vault 22 was supposed to be the solution to that problem, and it was promising. The government and a few private partners donated plenty of money and biosamples, including a new fungal strain from the geniuses over at Big Mountain Research Facility. That fungus, Bovaria mordicana, was basically Fallout's version of cordyceps from The Last of Us. It infected its host, killed it, then puppeted the corpse to spread spores to new victims. Its purpose was to eradicate pests that would usually ruin crops. Unfortunately, it had three main issues. The first was it took as long as 3 weeks from infection to kill the pest. The second was because of the way it spread. Needing close proximity to spores, it didn't work with any animals that weren't social and spent time around others. And third, it could infect people, and that was the true experiment of Vault 22. Big Mountain, in collaboration with Vault Tech, wanted to see what would happen in a sealed environment with a recycled air system and a few hundred test subjects. The infection spread fast. Vault dwellers started getting chills, fevers, and a hacking cough, caused by the fungus coating the lungs. The fungus sunk deep into the body, enough to force it to violently reject any antifungal treatments. Eventually, organs shut down and people died. And then we get to the bad part, because then people got back up again, as spore carriers, who would attack any uninfected. By 2296, the Vault was in chaos with an airborne plague and literal zombies. The last scientists planned to flood the lowest level with gas and ignite it, going literal scorched earth to try and burn out the infection. But the spore carriers somehow sensed the gas and swarmed the team before they could trigger the blast. By 2096, barely 20 years after the Great War, Vault 22 was lost. The survivors fled north, leaving the door open behind them. The plants grew unchecked, covering the vault and the surrounding area in lush greenery. A stark, horrifying contrast to the surrounding Mojave Desert. Thankfully, the spores aren't seemingly able to spread in the open air. But anyone foolish enough to go inside never comes back. The vault green exterior lures explorers in, and the spore carriers make sure they stay forever. And the story doesn't even end there. The handful of survivors who escaped fled into Zion National Park. Hardened by what they'd seen, they became isolationist, violent, and worse, still infected. Some died of the disease. Others died when a certain very angry army veteran went open season on them after they ate the locals to survive. Their bodies eventually rose again and retreated into Zion's caves, where the fungus could grow undisturbed. As for the last survivors of Vault 22 that fled once again out of Zion, we never hear from them again. But given their social skills and the fact they were infected, I don't think they or anyone else around them had a happy ending. But hey, at least throughout it all, they never fell into infighting. The same can't be said of the next vault. Vault 11, the death penalty vault, deep in the Mojave sits Vault 11. And unlike most vaults, it's completely empty. When its residents first entered, the door sealed shut behind them and couldn't be opened. And the vault computer told them of the vault's special rule each year: one person must enter a special execution chamber. If they didn't do that, the vault's life support systems would shut down, killing everyone. Only the original overseer knew this before the door sealed. And when the others found out he'd kept it secret, they, democratically, decided that the overseer should be the first sacrifice. Thus began the proud Vault 11 tradition of electing an overseer every year and sending them to die when their term ended. Soon, elections became a twisted parody of American politics. Posters littered the halls. Don't vote for Glover. His family needs him. Rumors about Haley are baseless. Vote Stone for overseer. And just like real life, several political parties formed. Large voting blocks that would pool their votes together to control who lived and who died. Over time, these blocks grew more powerful and corrupt. The leader of one of these blocks eventually forced a woman named Catherine Stoner to cheat on her husband with him, or her husband would be nominated for overseer, guaranteeing his death. She did what he said, and then the block leader nominated her husband anyway. Catherine responded with what people who study politics commonly call Plan B, mass murder. She went full Rambo, hunting down every Justice Block member she could find. In any other vault, she'd have been executed. In Vault 11, however, that would be a waste. In fact, this made her the perfect candidate for overseer. However, this was exactly what she wanted, for 3 reasons. 1. She got revenge on the voting bloc that betrayed her. 2. Her being nominated meant her husband wasn't, saving him. And 3. As overseer, she had the authority to alter the vault computer programming, changing the yearly selection of overseer from an election to be chosen completely and totally randomly. This, to put it lightly, was not received well. And by that, I mean a full-blown civil war erupted as the vault lost its mind with voting blocks going into all-out revolt. When the fighting finally ended, there were only 5 survivors. Those last 5, broken and done with it all, decided to end the cycle. They marched into the sacrifice chamber together, told the Vault AI that they are done. No longer will they send one to die, but they will die as one. And then, a pre-recorded message congratulated them. The Vault AI was never going to shut off the life support. They had passed the test of the vault. The vault door unlocked and they were all free to go. So all that death and chaos and betrayal was for absolutely nothing. Of the 5, 4 immediately shot themselves. The 5th walked out into the Mojave, never to be seen again. Alright, you did well sitting through a more subtle vault. We'll go to a more on-the-nose one. Vault 87. 87, the super mutant hotspot. Vault 87 is arguably the closest we get to a genuine horror movie in Fallout, or at least one that won't get them sued by Naughty Dog. Whatever its original experiment was supposed to be was scrapped in 2076, when the US government decided to repurpose it as a secondary testing site for the forced evolutionary virus. It made sense since West Tech's main facility in California was probably going to get nuked, so setting up a backup lab and a bomb-proof vault was good planning. Good for the scientists anyway, not for the residents. So when the bombs fell, the dwellers crowded into a death trap. And I mean this literally. Within the first decade or so, over 90 deaths were reported, an insane number for any vault. In most cases, the bodies were quickly disposed of, except they weren't. 90% of those deaths were fake. The so-called deceased were abducted and taken to the restricted experimental wing for FEV experiments. The virus had been modified to emphasize certain beneficial traits: strength, endurance, resistance, i.e., it created super mutants. Most subjects gained muscle mass, lost all their hair, and lost most of their brain function. At least one forgot how to breathe, and simply died. And again, I need to emphasize that transforming from FEV exposure is the most excruciating thing a human being can go through. Imagine pulling a muscle, except it's every single muscle on your body, along with every bone violently pushing and growing and morphing. And of course, it could just not work, and you end up dying as your body grows 8 spleens but destroys your lungs because FEV isn't stable. But of course, the scientists kept going because progress was progress. And of course, with so many people disappearing, much of the rest of the vault was in mourning. One technician started hearing children's voices echoing through the walls and was told he was going insane. He wasn't. He was hearing the kids from Little Lamplight, a nearby cave where children had taken refuge after the war. But that's another whole thing we might get into in another video. Another man, who was told his wife had died, decided 5 stages of grief was too much and stopped on rage. He was convinced the scientists had killed her and plotted to murder them. We don't know exactly what happened, but we can make an educated guess. The grieving husband broke into the restricted labs to attack the scientists, and the test subjects escaped in the process. Mentally broken super mutants rampaged through the vault, killing or converting everyone they found. When they ran out of people to eat or turn into more of their own, they left the vault to plague the capital Wasteland's people, killing and eating the weak while bringing the strong back to make into more super mutants. But there's one more tragedy in this, one more twist that makes this whole thing read like a Stephen King book. The man's wife wasn't a test subject. She just died of cancer, one of the very few natural deaths in the vault. The doctors just failed to properly console a grieving man, and he went off the deep end. So Vault 87, and the entire capital Wasteland by extension, didn't collapse because of the horrible, inhumane experiments. It collapsed because of one man's misunderstanding and the failure of doctors to realize how badly he was grieving. Unfortunately, this was not the only vault designed to turn people into abominations. Vault 12, the Living Cemetery. Vault 12 is probably the most straightforward, disturbing vault in Fallout. Located beneath Bakersfield, California, its story is simple. The vault door never fully closed. When the bombs fell on October 23, 2077, every other vault in America sealed tight, except this one. The residents entered, the door didn't close completely, and soon word spread that the vault was still open. Crowds from nearby forced their way in, cramming themselves into the vault for safety. In hindsight, it would probably have been better if they stayed outside and died. Because the jammed door wasn't a malfunction, it was intentional. The vault itself was designed to keep its inhabitants safe from raiders, famine, and any other potential factors. Except one. By keeping the door open, it guaranteed radiation could leak in, because the experiment of this vault was to study the effects of radiation poisoning. Now, players often forget what radiation poisoning actually means. In the newer games, it's just a simple red bar pressing down on your health bar, to the point you could die from a stubbed toe. Or in Fallout 3 in New Vegas, a minor stat penalty that you can fix with a dose of Radaway. In reality, radiation doesn't just hurt you, it breaks you. It tears through the body on a cellular level, shifting atoms and shredding DNA in every cell it touches. If your body is a temple, radiation isn't damaging the building, it's replacing the bricks with mud, which causes that temple, like your body, to fall apart. And while most illnesses cause symptoms because your body is fighting back, radiation sickness is the opposite. The symptoms, vomiting, bleeding, burns, organ failure, are signs your body is literally falling apart. Your cells stop dividing properly, your tissues stop healing, and everything that keeps you alive begins to disintegrate from the inside out. It's slow, it's messy, and it's agonizing. So imagine thousands of people huddled in a vault, thinking they'd escaped death, only to spend days, weeks, or months suffering to the point they would have welcomed it. And the worst part is, some didn't even get that, because some survived. Their skin peeled away, their hair fell out, and they began rotting, but somehow they kept walking. They became ghouls, and being a ghoul is arguably worse than dying, your body rotting in slow motion, and most regular people treat you horribly, if not outright shoot you on sight, and you get to watch other ghouls go feral, knowing that one day you'll join them. The ferals don't attack you, of course, because they see you as one of them, since if you live long enough, you will be. A great thought at the back of every ghoul's mind. And whether Vault Tech expected that outcome is anyone's guess, but the result was the same. Vault 12 became the single largest source of ghouls in all of California, if not the entire western USA. Bakersfield became Necropolis, the city of the dead. After it was destroyed by the Master's army, its survivors fled south and founded Dayglow, one of the founding cities of the NCR. So technically, Vault 12 was a success. It proved that humans could survive extreme radiation poisoning by becoming something that barely counts as human. The good news is, even after 200 years, they're still alive. The bad news is even after 200 years, they're still alive. For no other reason than the number we're jumping from Vault 12 to Vault 112. Vault 112, the virtual hell. In the capital Wasteland, under a pretty unremarkable garage infested with mole rats, lies Vault 112. It's one of the smallest vaults in the series. But it's not the size that matters, but how much it traumatizes people. Okay, that analogy fell apart. Moving on. On paper, Vault 112 sounded like paradise. Every resident would live inside a virtual reality utopia, each person sealed in a stasis pod and uploaded into a simulation where every desire was fulfilled. In any other context, yeah, that would be dystopian. But when the world ends and you're stuck in a glorified basement, and screw it, plug me in. To make things even better, the vault's overseer was Dr. Stanislaus Braun himself, a brilliant German scientist that had moved to the US and was responsible for multiple pre-war breakthroughs, including the Garden of Eden creation kit. There wasn't anyone alive that had better knowledge of that kind of tech than him, especially after the bombs fell. If anyone could keep the simulation running, it was him. Unfortunately, Braun is the problem, because Vault 112 was his reward from Vault Tech and the US military for years of service, a personal kingdom where he could play God, with the Dwellers as his toys. Imagine Sword Art Online and Braun was the admin. The simulation was his playground, and he got bored quickly, so he started torturing the other people for fun, sometimes physically, sometimes emotionally. But hey, the good news was they didn't remember it, because he kept wiping their memories. The residents would suffer, then forget, and Braun would start again. An infinite loop of cheerful ignorance, sudden extreme trauma, and back to life as usual. Over and over and over again. And ignorance is bliss, because one resident, Old Lady Dithers, wasn't properly plugged into the simulation, so she was aware she was in one, and remembered the horrible stuff Braun did. I don't know what's worse, knowing that she's in a simulation, or that no one else believes her. And if you're wondering why you find them all still alive in Fallout 3 200 years later, it's because their pods keep them in biological stasis. If they step out, and they would probably die instantly, either rapidly aging or infection, but so long as they stay inside, they get to live and be tortured forever. Yay! In-game, when you go into the simulation, you get two options. Play along with Braun's twisted games until he's satisfied and lets you go. Hack the system and kill everyone but Braun, freeing the Vaulters from purgatory while trapping Braun in a new one, since he's stuck in his simulation alone forever now. You know a vault's disturbing when the good ending is just killing the residents. And speaking of killing residents, Vault 75, the eugenics vault. So the disturbing thing about Vault 75 is, well, eugenics. Yeah, just eugenics. I don't really have a fun way to sugarcoat that one. Vault 75 sits beneath Malden Middle School in the Commonwealth and offered discounted spots to students and their families. When they arrived after the bombs fell, the parents were separated for processing. They were never seen again. The children were then told that the Uptop land, or what we call the Wasteland, was a dangerous place, and that they must be trained to survive it when they become an adult. Trained, meaning a lifetime of brutal physical and mental testing until they turned 18, when they'd supposedly graduate and head to the surface to rebuild society. Of course, that was a lie. Vault 75's real purpose was to create genetically superior super soldiers. The Vault's scientists ran endless evaluations to identify exceptional genes. Strength, intelligence, agility, anything that could be replicated. Also, one of the main supporters of this project was none other than Dr. Stanislaus Braun, the same German scientist from Vault 112. Some things never change. Anyway, when each child turned 18, they faced three possible fates. The physically gifted were harvested, their organs and DNA used to clone the next batch of better babies. The highly intelligent were recruited to replace the scientists and continue the experiment. Everyone else went to the incinerator. Except there's one tiny problem with this experiment. Well, besides, eugenics. Because like most people who love eugenics, Vault Tech had absolutely no idea how genetics actually works. Eugenics, in theory, is just selective selective breeding, letting only certain members of a species reproduce to make more desirable traits. That's how we ended up with pugs, greyhounds, and basically every dog that can't breathe properly. But there isn't a 1-1 gene for everything. There's no single smart or strong gene you can just isolate. A mother with a six-pack doesn't give to a baby with a six-pack, and a rocket scientist's kid can still eat glue. However, while this experiment was eventually doomed to fail, the people inside decided to speed it up. Exact details are sparse, but here's the image I pieced together. A newly recruited junior scientist started asking why the vault never contacted its graduates on the surface. When his superiors brushed him off, he thought that was sus. So did some digging and uncovered the truth. He then secretly smuggled weapons to the kids he was supposed to supervise. And those kids, who'd spent their whole lives training to fight, used those weapons to overthrow the scientists in a violent revolt and escape. And as messed up as it is, this is one of the few vault stories that ends with something close to a happy ending. A single compassionate scientist rejected indoctrination and instead worked with his peers to fight against a common enemy. So maybe, in a twisted way, Vault 75's experiment finally succeeded. Not in what it was meant to do, but ironically, in the lie. They created a generation of kids who were compassionate enough to unite against them, escape, and use the skills they learned to finally live above ground. Now there's plenty of other vaults that deserve spots on this list, like Vault 4 or 51, but those will be covered in other videos. Instead, how about we do something a little different? A spin on a vault not talked about very much on these sorts of videos because of how vanilla it seems? In my opinion, it's all 31 flavors of insanity. And to those of you who got this joke, what are you still doing up this late? Bedtime in the nursing home starts at 6 p.m. Now that I've ticked off my primary audience, it's time to double down with this honorable mention, special mention Vault 76. You can't stop me. This is my video. Now, you might be saying, but Ghoul, Vault 76 was a control vault. Everyone lived in luxury for 25 years before leaving. And to that, I say, yes. But in the words of contemporary philosopher Solid JJ, have you considered the implications? Because look, Fallout 76 is a fun game. I've had a lot of fun playing it, but fun to play doesn't mean fun to live in. Call of Duty is fun too, but if you told an Iraq veteran his dead friends just had a skill issue because you easily survived 20 gunshots in multiplayer, you're getting punched in the face. It's the same thing here. Sure, the game is easy for us to play, but imagine what our in-game characters are actually going through. Vault 76's residents, handpicked successful businessmen and women and their kids, were expecting to leave the vault and rebuild West Virginia. At best, the dangers they were prepared for were radiation poisoning, environmental pollution, and some raiders. But when those doors opened onto the lands of West Virginia, what they found wasn't almost heaven, it was complete hell. To list out that they had to deal with in no particular order. Super mutants, giant green ogres that want to kill and eat you, not necessarily in that order, or transform you into one of them, which is one of the most painful things a human being can experience. Literal zombies in the form of feral ghouls, an entire region called the Ash Heap, which is so polluted you can't find a single square inch of ground not covered in ash, which, by the way, is carried by the wind to the rest of Appalachia, guaranteeing black lung no matter where you are. Every animal suddenly grows 10 times bigger and discovers a love for human flesh. Radroaches, mirelurks, rad scorpions. And who could forget the humble Deathclaw? Every single fictional monster from folklore is no longer fictional, either because it actually existed pre-war and you now have the privilege of getting eaten by it, or because the name was given to something just as if not more horrifying that was created after the war. We got the Wendigo, the Blue Devil, Chupacabra, and every flavor of Mothman you can think of. Aliens that abduct people to mutate into more monsters just to dump them back to Earth to terrorize the population. A whole new wonderful list of mutated diseases you catch just by standing in a puddle. The vast majority of robots in a region going full Skynet and murdering everything on sight. And, of course, bats the size of commercial airplanes that infect you with a plague that causes your skin to burn and grow green crystals while you slowly lose your mind to a hive mind. And yes, you feel everything. Welcome home, Vault Dweller. Country roads, take me the hell out of here. And even if you survive all that, what's the reward? You get to live another day in hell. But Ghoul, you say, we are rebuilding West Virginia. And to that, dear Strawman, I say, did you? Appalachia is never mentioned again in any later Fallout game. Not once. Yes, that's mostly because 76 came out most recently. But until it's mentioned in a future game, I'm counting a mission as canon. Fight me. All your victories, curing the Scorched Plague, saving Appalachia from disaster after disaster, building literal cities from scratch, none of it mattered. Even in Fallout 3 when you go to the pit, a stone's throw from the game area of Fallout 76, and where you actually go in Fallout 76, there's no mention of the Vault 76 dwellers anywhere, which means one thing: everything you built became dust, and every sacrifice you made was erased by time. The only thing worse than failing to achieve greatness is achieving it and being completely forgotten. And personally, that's at least disturbing to me. And that's it, we're done. If you enjoyed this video and want to see every Vault experiment explained, click the video on screen now.